Can everybody hear me? Thank you very much for coming out, ladies and gentlemen. I know it's we're getting to that summer season where everybody wants to go out, especially with this nice weather, and hang out, and get ready for all the ocean and the summer people and residents. My name is John Denny. I am on the Board of Selectmen, and with us this evening from the town, we have our Coastal Resource Officer, Nancy Durfee. We also, right here, we also have our DPW Director, Kevin Cafferty, gentleman sitting back there. And we also have Laura Harbottle, our town planner, in the back, in the area there. Did I miss anybody else from the town? Because I don't want to... all right, perfect. All right, so this is going to be a little bit longer presentation than the last phase. That was on August or April 28th. I'll get right to the point of the presentation with John Ramsey. But John Ramsey and his associate, Rebecca Quam, they're with the Applied Coastal Research and Engineering Company. They've been doing this for a number of months, collecting data, putting all this information together. They did the presentation in phase one, a great presentation. If you folks weren't here, there's a copy. You can get it on our website. If not, then either talk to either myself or Nancy Durfee. We'll make sure you get that presentation with the slides. I know coming in from the back end and also from this end, if you don't mind putting your name and if you have an email address, it's only for information that we can disseminate to you folks through the course of the year about this type of resiliency in the coastal areas. So if you can, great. We can try to update you with all that information. I also want to thank from the state. We have from the Department of Coastal Zone Management, Rebecca Henney, who's here with us, and she is our state coastal geologist, so thank you very much. We also have Jeff Burnham. He also is with CZM, and he is the regional coastal, regional coastal specialist. I appreciate you coming to this presentation. You know, just so that you folks understand, this presentation, all this research was done through the state with approximately $180,000. So we're very thankful as a town to be able to have that money to be able to go through all this, because this document, this information that you're going to be seeing tonight, the information you saw about a month and a half ago, is something that we as a town are looking to go forward prospectively. I know I've mentioned in the past, and I know my board has mentioned in the past, that the towns and many towns always take more of a retroactive approach to things. Storms happen, we take a look at it, we try to get through FEMA, get some reimbursement, fix what we have, because the reimbursement's like, you know, 3/4, 75%, and then we pay the remaining 25%, and then we get to the next one. That is not the way the town of Scituate is looking going forward. We're trying to be proactive, which is why we have this presentation. And with this coastal resiliency presentation report going forward, this is really a document that leads the town onto a job, looking at all the possible strategies that we can try to employ going forward. There are going to be certain actions going to be listed tonight. No action, what does that mean? Some action, alternative strategies. What are the engineering feats? What are the scientific issues? And frankly, what are the economic costs, not just for today, but in the short term and the long term that we're going to be looking at. Very hot button issues for many people looking at your town and trying to figure out what's going to be the best interest of not only yourselves, but your neighbors and your town going forward. So I want you to also understand that because of the long presentation, we will take a break. There is some refreshments over here. John will tell us when the break is. There are restrooms down the hall. If you need direction, we'll show you where they are. And without much further ado, I want to thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn it over to John Ramsey now so that we can start the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm going to jump right into this because it is going to be a long presentation. What I'd like to point out is that this is the second meeting that we're talking about things here. And what we're really looking at, before we talk about some of the history and trying to come up with a prioritization scheme, and that's what we looked at before. Tonight we're going to spend our time looking at alternatives, what alternatives might work, and also looking at some of the costs, as mentioned. Obviously, you guys who live on the coast or live near the coast, you know that the town spends quite a bit of money right now just repairing things, but looking forward, that cost is, some of the numbers that you're going to see tonight are rather staggering, but it is something to look forward to as far as planning, and that's sort of where we're going with this presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about background. Obviously one of the things the town's done is trying to do this reactive versus proactive approach. This is kind of a look forward, a lean forward type approach where we want to lean into things and actually try to do some proactive planning. So that doesn't mean the town hasn't done their fair share of trying to plan in the past, but at the same time, it is a reactive approach. There's a lot of money being spent every time there's a storm. You try to get your FEMA grants, etc. But it is a little frustrating, and certainly understanding from the standpoint of living on the coast, something gets destroyed and only some of it gets fixed. Not a big surprise. You guys have the highest FEMA flood damage in the entire state for any town. So it is very difficult to try to get enough funds to try to make everything work. And obviously, you guys know that there's been a bunch of work going on in Oceanside to repair some of the seawalls there. Right now, there's also a plan to nourish North Scituate Beach, which is moving forward in permitting. So certainly, there is some measures to move forward. But the first thing we certainly want to look at is what is it about maintaining the status quo and how we're going to evaluate that first. So the public presentation, the first one, we looked at historical coastal change, we quantified that historical storm damage, and then we developed that prioritization. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward, but we did come up with different areas and why they are prioritized, either high, medium, or low. So if you have questions about that, I certainly encourage you to look at the last presentation. And then for this presentation, it's going to be, as we said, it is going to be rather long, but at the same time, we want to make sure, first, we're going through all the different methodologies or technologies that can be used to address some of the erosion and storm damage issues. But on the other hand, we also want to go section by section, because each section of your shoreline is very different. And I think that's very important, and that's going to be the second part after the intermission. But I think, obviously everybody has a different interest in here depending on where you live. So that is sort of something we want to make sure we touch base on and go through each area individually. So the study areas, there's actually, if you look over here, my red dot is over there. There's actually this same slide is on a poster over here. These are the different sections we looked at. Again, this was presented last time, but this is the way we broke up the system. And when I do talk about things, I'll be going from south to north, from Hummerock South up to the north to Minot Beach. And again, the prioritization criteria, just very quickly, we looked at damage susceptibility. A lot of that's based on FEMA damage and understanding that FEMA claims are not the one, are not necessarily all inclusive, because sometimes people don't report things. However, it's some of the best information we have. We certainly looked at geology and elevation landform, susceptibility and damage to public infrastructure. Emergency egress, a lot of your roadways obviously are low, and during the storm, whether the road gets overtopped and covered with cobble or just ends up being underwater for a certain portion of the storm, makes it very difficult for getting either emergency access to get people out or in. Breach susceptibility, very small. It's not something all around town, but there is certainly an area of North Hummerock which has some concerns. And then the state has done a very good job of looking at the condition of coastal engineering structures over the years, and they've developed a rating system. We reviewed that and looked at that in some more detail, but some of the issues are a lot of the coastal engineering structures in Scituate, but also around the state, are well past their design life. And so that's creating an issue as to what we need to do to make sure that those structures can maintain their viability in the future. So this is what the summary from the last presentation. These are the areas that were prioritized as high need, medium need, and then lower need. And when I mean lower need, just is a lot of these areas are generally high and fairly well protected. The medium, it just ends up more based on damage and elevation as well. But the high ones are not really a big surprise. We know Oceanside Drive gets overtopped Hummerock. North is a big problem. Cedar Point, Peggotty, and Surfside Road. So those are some of the hardest hit areas. And then North Scituate kind of connected to, the only difference is that you have the road between you and the ocean, where you don't on Surfside. So going through the different shore protection options, we're going to go through every single shore protection option we looked at. It doesn't mean that we didn't look at others. We may have dismissed some just because they really don't work here. However, in general, we tried to touch on as many as we could that are likely to work. And I'll talk a little bit about how we went through that process. So this is sort of the way we came up with the rating criteria. Obviously one of the big issues is cost. It's not just the capital cost of actually constructing some sort of coastal engineering structure or other measure, but it's also maintaining that. Some last longer than others, so certainly the capital cost, but also maintenance cost issue. Longevity, how long is it going to last? How long is it going to protect the shoreline? Likelihood of success, seems like it's combined with some of the others, but really likelihood of success, there's a lot of measures out there. There's a lot of things that people have tried, and you have a very specific environment. You have a very high tide range, you have a high wave energy site, and you have the storm surge, even though we think of the storm surge as being very high, the storm surge above high tide is really not all that much. So what we talked about last time is what you end up with is a 10-year storm and a 100-year storm. There's not that great of a difference as far as wave energy and damage hitting the shoreline. So we want to make sure that we're looking at types of shoreline protection that work in this specific environment. Benefits. When I look at benefits, that's kind of ancillary benefits to not only just what it's doing as far as protection, but you may have something like a beach nourishment project, which is not only doing protection when it's designed and built, but it's also supplying sand to other beaches. So it's providing, even as it goes away, it's providing benefits to other beaches downriver. Regulatory implications. I could sugarcoat this one, but really, what it really comes down to is there are certain things that meet regulatory standards and there are certain things that don't. And if something doesn't meet regulatory standards, the bar is very high to get past that. So one of the things that we're very aware of is what the regulatory standards are. Certainly done enough permitting over the last 25 years in this state. But at the same time, it doesn't mean we're not willing to push the envelope. But we do understand what's kind of within that envelope of regulatory standards and what can and can't be permitted. And then other challenges. There's always other challenges, whether it be some might be a view issue. When somebody asked me, actually a regulator asked me at a site visit, said, couldn't you keep this revetment and seawall in the same footprint? So I said, well, yeah, sure I could, if you don't mind a 40-foot high seawall. Well, if you live behind that seawall, that would probably not be something that you'd be all that happy about. And we can solve it without we can solve that problem without building a 40-foot seawall. So there are certainly other issues that you may need to think about besides just all the ones above here. I just want to give some historic perspective. One of the things that came up in the last meeting, everybody said, well, what did things look like before? And one of the things we always like to do is kind of look back. One thing that's great about Massachusetts is we have a great history of looking at old photos. We've been around and developed our shoreline for a long time, and people have been using these beaches in the vicinity of Boston for a long time, trying to get away from the city. So this gives you an idea of what your Scituate beach looked like. It's quite a bit different than it is today. Your Scituate and Surfside area down below there now. You really have no high tide beach there now, but this is what it looked like dating back 50 to 100 years. And looking at North Scituate Beach, there's a different picture. This is, if you get an idea where the rag line is, that would be the high water line that day. And this is in 2016 what the high water line looks like today. So obviously we've lost quite a bit of beach there, no big surprise. And this is pretty typical for much of the coast that's armored with these vertical seawalls. Sand Hills area, so we're looking north from Cedar Point area. So obviously you have, again, your high tide line, you had a beach in front of there. Now you have a beach at low tide, but when it gets up to high tide, you really have lost all your beach. Similar looking south, same problem. And Peggy Beach never looks quite as obvious. And Peggy Beach is probably probably the fastest floating beach, besides the area, the Broadmoor area south of Third Cliff. But this area, the pictures don't do it justice, but basically the whole beach just moves back, is one of the things you see. So it looks like it looked very much the same in 1959 as it does in 2016, but that beach was quite a ways out, and now we see that the salt marsh is getting covered. But back in 1959, that channel that was not completely filled in was actually, had water flowing through it. So that whole beach is kind of a hot back. And then Peggotty Beach again, this is at the other end where we have more of the coarse cobble and gravel on the beach. This is what it looked like in 1954, and you kind of can tell some difference here. It was more gravelly cobbly beach, but you can see that the houses were much further back, and that doesn't mean that the houses will move forward, it just means that the beach is moved back. So these houses are now much more exposed. The houses are now actually in front of the dune at the end of the beach rather than behind the dune on top of it. And then, where one of the reasons why some of these beaches have jumped back, besides just natural erosion and ongoing sea level rise over the last 100 years or so, one of the things we do see is, Third Cliff, before it was armored, provided a nice sediment source, had a beach in front of it, and provided a sediment source in the downdrift area. One of the things that happens is after you armor these glacial deposits, what ends up happening is that sand or gravel, etc., that was washing out of there is no longer available and doesn't get transported, which does a great job of protecting the upland at Third Cliff, but you lose the sediment supply to downwind beaches. And finally, I guess looking at Hummerock Beach. Now, Hummerock Beach is it's always been a barrier beach, just like it is today. But again, it's the shoreline is gradually out back. It's more of an episodic issue in Hummerock. It's certainly more driven by storms. And this gives you an idea, and actually we don't have the date of this photo, but it gives you an idea that the beach is not all that dissimilar from what it is now, but certainly the beach is the high water line has moved back quite a way since the 1950s. I pointed out this slide before, and I'm actually going to mention it one more time, maybe two more times in this presentation. As we go through this, one of the things to keep in mind is we're looking, obviously we're going to be talking big dollars for a lot of the solutions we're talking about, but I want to keep in mind, or everybody keep in mind, that a lot of this is sort of this concept of a private-public partnership. Obviously the town has gone forward with state funding to do this sort of analysis, but this is obviously going to require input from you guys and input to the selectmen and the town as to what you guys think is the best plan for moving forward. So I want to leave that on the table, and certainly I know I'm going to get a lot of comments at the end. So I just want to kind of point out that all of this is going to certainly lead to no one being anything jammed down their throat, but this whole process is more of that private-public partnership concept. Okay, so now we're jumping back to Clifford the dog, because this is the way coastal engineers try not to do alternatives analyses. One of the things I always point out is, obviously one of the things we hop through is a whole series of solutions when we're looking at alternatives analyses. And it would be nice if it was this simple when Clifford, this is from the book The Big Storm, sees that a hurricane's about to take away Grandma's house. He decides that he's going to come up with a solution. So he digs up the trees, puts the trees in front of the house, digs up some sand, and then sits on it. So this is his solution to the problem. And as coastal engineers, it'd be nice if everything was this simple. Obviously it's not, but one of the things that we are looking at is we try to think outside the box and try to come up with a broad range of solutions that we can to solve some of these issues. And none of these issues are easy because he's not looking at what downdrift impact he's having by sitting on that dune. Okay, next slide. So maintain the status quo. That's the first alternative we're going to look at, and that's sort of our baseline. So what happens, what is it that we're maintaining, and how are we doing it right now, and what kind of jobs is that leading to? Obviously one of the things that we have a lot of in Scituate is a lot of vertical seawalls with some revetments in front of them, and some places where they're not. Since 2010, the town has spent about $13 million just trying to get their stuff back up to grade after, and pointed out, after it gets damaged by storms. So the town gets grant money, some of it from FEMA, etc., trying to pay for, it's getting some government funding for 75% or whatever they can get. And what you end up doing is really just fixing things, maybe adding 2 feet to the seawall, and hoping that that's going to give you some relief, but really you're not thinking forward about trying to make things a lot better. You're really just going after the minimum, maybe a little extra to give you a little bit more of a buffer. And one of the things I want to remind everybody about is, we've had some storms since 2010, but if you go back not too long ago, the 1991 storm, which really isn't the storm of record, it's the 78 storm, or even before that, 1898 Portland Gale. Those are the big storms. This was a doozy, somewhere around a 40-year storm. But I mean, if you take it to today's dollars, just in that one storm, just the FEMA flood damage. I'm not talking about a lot of the other things that were done. Looked at some of the opening up the shelters and all the other stuff that goes along with this. We had in today's dollars about $34 million worth of damage in that one storm. So it kind of just gives you a perspective of kind of when we're talking about numbers as we move down, what you can get from one storm. On the right, all those red dots are repetitive loss properties that were damaged in the 1991 storm. And you can see that they really are spread, other than properties on the cliffs, they're really spread all over town. So that storm really damaged properties everywhere. More recent storms really only affected a few areas, some of the areas that are hit pretty much every storm. But when you do have a 91 type northeaster, you are actually getting impacted pretty much your entire coast. So what we're going to do is we're going to see a lot of these slides tonight, and I'm not going to read all of the information on it because we would be here all night. But what I do want to point out is kind of pros and cons of each alternative. And again, there's going to be a report that's going to have all this information in it. But I just wanted to sort of go over what the pros and cons of the status quo. The pros are none. No big surprise. You guys are just kind of holding the line, doing what you can. The cons, and keep in mind, a lot of this is you're just going to keep having the ongoing problems that you have now. And the problems aren't getting better; they're getting worse. And that doesn't mean that the sea level rise, the sea level rise may be accelerating and taking off. But even if it doesn't, just with the linear sea level rise that we've experienced in the last 100 years, every storm gets a little bit worse. What used to be a 10-year storm is now going to be once every 5 years. So it's not, so what ends up happening, as I said, the difference in storm surge really isn't all that different between a 10 and 100-year storm. So what ends up happening is, even if you get a small rise in sea level, just on a linear fashion, you're getting much more damage from a storm. So keep that in mind. And so your ongoing maintenance costs are going to increase, not only because the storms are getting worse, but because a lot of your infrastructure is very aged and it's well past its design life. So that's going to make things more and more expensive. And as you lose beach, because one of the things you see, not only is you've seen the beach erode, but when you have these vertical seawalls, you're also getting a lot of scour against the seawalls, and we'll talk about that in a minute. As your beach lowers, the waves are higher when they hit the seawall, and so those higher waves are going to do more damage. So the status quo really is going to make things, if you just let things keep going the way they're going, it's going to make things worse and worse. And you're going to be spending more and more every year just trying to maintain the status quo. Okay, so everybody always wants to talk about seawalls and revetments as the solution to all our woes. So I'm going to talk about seawalls and revetments, what's good about them and what's not so good about them. So what we have here, we see Oceanside Drive with a vertical seawall, and we have that little toe revetment in front of it. When I mean revetment, I mean the armor stone that's placed. A lot of these areas, it wasn't placed in a organized fashion, but it was just more dumped. Just tried to break up the wave energy the best it could. Just knowing that having that to protect the toe was going to give the seawall a little bit more life. And then down below Second Cliff, we see what's a classic stone revetment, which is just armor stone fitted together in a more organized fashion, and that slope breaks up the wave energy. And generally, the slope surface is going to break up wave energy better than the vertical seawall like we see in Oceanside. So one of the things I'd like to point out, what we have in many of the places here is we have these existing seawalls with these kind of little disorganized toe revetments is what I'll call them. And so, that works in the mean high water situation, and you get some wave energy breaking there, and it works fairly well. But one of the things we have calculated or looked at is we know during a storm that we get an incredible amount of overtopping, incredible amount of storm damage behind the seawalls. So we've looked and gone through a bunch of the seawalls and looked at what you're going to have to do to try to maintain a level of protection that's better than what you have, that actually allows you to maintain all of your utilities and roadways, etc., behind the seawalls. And so one of the things you have to do is obviously widen the revetment to make it so it breaks waves better, but also raise the seawall. And we looked at that for various areas, and I'll go over those section by section, but that gives you an idea of what really needs to be done so that things are improved. And I think just going back, and this is a slide that I had from last time, but I think it's worth for the understanding of why seawalls act the way they do and why we keep seeing the beaches disappear in front of them. Everybody, there's a view that a seawall is makes the beach disappear, but it's kind of a combined effect. When you have a natural beach system, this is the way your beach looks, and when the beach wants to retreat because of erosion, it just moves back. And the beach looks the same, but it has just moved back. So if you had a house sitting here, your house would have fallen on the beach without the seawall. No big surprise. When you put a seawall in, you have this beach width, but the beach wants to retreat, but the whole profile can't retreat naturally. So what ends up happening is you end up with this vertical face closer to the beach, and that's what we see. You look at the historical photos compared to the more recent photos, and this is exactly what you see. That now you have really no intertidal beach, or you just have a beach rated just barely at low tide, where you used to have a beach throughout the entire tide. And then there's also the secondary effect, where when you have a seawall, when you have a condition where waves are, or the tide elevation is relatively low, the water runs up, it doesn't impact the seawall. But when the water elevation gets higher, when you have a storm surge, the waves are breaking right on the seawall, and there's this effect of scouring right at the toe of the seawall. So one thing is that the whole profile's moving back. The other thing is actually with that vertical reflection, of a wave off a vertical seawall, you actually do get the scour. So it's kind of a double whammy. So that's one of the problems with seawalls and revetments to some level, is that they don't allow the system to act naturally. They do a great job of holding the line. So the issue with holding the line is you have to either protect your toe and give up your beach, or you have to move your infrastructure, because you're going to start getting a lot more overtopping, and you're going to get a lot more damage to your homes. So seawalls, again, I'm not going to read all of this, but so one of the things that you have a pro is that you're going to reduce your wave energy coming across the structure. And you're going to get reduced overtopping. Depending on how you design things, but you can, these structures can be used to dissipate wave energy and to, protect the upland to some extent. I think one of the big things that people don't talk about is they really do provide a false sense of security. And I wouldn't even point out anybody here, but one of the things we see as we drive around, obviously there's a lot of waterfront properties for sale for a lot of money here. Which is great, and when you come on a day like today and look and say, hey, this is fantastic, this waterfront property looks like a great buy. But one of the issues is it's got the seawall, why should I worry? It is kind of a false sense of security, because if you looked at some of the FEMA damage and some of the other issues, there's a lot of water that comes over that very northeastern, as you well know. And so it really does give you a false sense of security. And just because there's a seawall there doesn't mean that seawall is in great condition. And it's quite possible that at some point in the not too distant future, if some maintenance isn't done to it, then it could collapse. And when it does collapse, everything behind it goes immediately. The other thing is it doesn't restore beaches. It sounds kind of flip, but what it really comes down to, when you are holding the line right there, that's great for the upland, but you're not doing anything for the system to act naturally. And if the system's not acting naturally, the impacts just keep moving down the shoreline. And really just creates more and more of a cost for your neighbors, for the town, for the state down the road. Just creates more and more problems. And then we talked about this accelerated beach lowering. Again, the wave reflection off of these structures is higher than off a natural beach, so it naturally is going to lower or actually artificially, is going to lower the beach profile more than a natural beach system, and therefore you are going to actually kind of accelerate your beach lower. One of the things we looked at, Rebecca did a good job with this, and this is a very confusing plot, and I'm not going to go over it in much detail. The one thing I do want to point out, I talked about raising the seawalls, raising the revetments. The reason why we do that is we want to reduce the amount of waves overtopping. So we look at these 100-year, 50-year storm conditions, how much wave energy and wave volume, water volume is going over the seawalls. And so what we look at is kind of a line here where you get damage landward of the seawall if you have this much overtopping, and below that you don't get any damage. So what we do is we just keep moving the revetment and seawall up, and so we get to a situation where we're not causing ourselves damage. And so that's how we came up with some of the criteria that you'll see down the road as to why we went up and out in certain places where we're looking at improving the seawalls. Beach nourishment, much maligned in Massachusetts, not quite sure why. Beach nourishment is something that's done for all of you who go to Florida or Maryland or Virginia or North Carolina on vacation or for a second home. It is the primary way of doing shore protection in other parts of the country. Massachusetts not as much, and a lot of the reason why is because a lot of the beaches, or at least in my view, a lot of the beaches in Massachusetts are privately owned, where in most other states it is a public resource. So it ends up, that the feds and the state are willing to put more money in other places. And there's also a lot more tourist dollars in a lot of other places because it does provide recreational resources as well as shore protection. But what I want to talk about tonight is the shore protection aspect. When we see beach nourishments done around here, most of them are done with very little volume of sediment for just to become a beneficial reuse from a dredge project or done at a very small scale to enhance a dune and that type of work. What I'm talking about for beach nourishment, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is large volumes of sediment, getting that beach berm elevation up, and having an engineering design life that is significant, on the order of a decade or more, to try to make sure that you're providing enough sediment for the system to slide down those beaches, but also to provide shore protection during major storm events. And people say, well, you can't really do that. I mean, it's just a beach. But one thing I will say, if you go to the east coast of Florida, most of those beaches, from Miami Beach all the way up, most of those beaches are nourished beaches, and they do protect. They did a great job during Hurricane Jean and Francis of actually protecting all that infrastructure, and only a couple places did they get overtopped. And without those beach nourishments, the whole front 2, 3, 4 rows of houses would have been wiped out. Because those surges, the storm surges from those were quite a bit more than we ever get up here. So one example, we used this last time, was Winthrop Beach. This was not pumped from offshore, but it was actually trucked. And so you see actually the nourishment going in. The elevation of this nourishment is about, I believe, about 8 feet above high tide. So the berm is 8 feet above high tide level. And so when we're looking at North Scituate beach nourishment, you know how high the seawall is. The nourishment that we're looking at for there is only a couple feet below the top of the seawall. That's the way the berm elevation will go out. So it's going to be an incredible amount of beach fill, but that's what you need to do to make sure you're dissipating the wave energy. You don't want your beach nourishment overtopped. This is what the beach looked like before the nourishment went in, not dissimilar to some of the areas here. This is what it looked like after Juno, after Winter Storm Juno. And these groins here, this is actually a new structure. These groins here are actually buried in the nourishment. You can't even see them. And one thing you notice is there's snow on the beach. This is a beach that, just like a lot of your beaches, the water went right over the top of the beach. There's snow on the beach. No water got over that during Juno. And that was a major storm that created some serious problems in your town. So, this is something that can work. It does work. And this beach is pretty much in the same shape as it was when we built it. So, it can be designed to last. The other thing that's important if we're going to do beach nourishment is we need to understand sediment transport. These are some of the modeled sediment transport directions, the arrows, and the magnitudes are in the colors. Don't want to get caught up in that, but when we're looking at these types of things, we want to make sure that we understand how beach nourishment is going to function. The last thing you want to do is put beach nourishment in a place where it is going to disappear very quickly because it's a very strong littoral drift, taking sediment all one direction very quickly, like the outer, past the elbow in Cape Cod, the National Seashore. A very difficult place. Nantucket, another very difficult place. Wisconsin, they were looking at nourishment. But that, trying to hold a nourishment there, very, very difficult because of the really high sediment transport rates. In Scituate, or at least in some places in Scituate, we have some relatively lower sediment transport rates, so it's a potential possibility. The last thing I should point out from nourishment, one of the things in this area, you have, as you know, you have a mixture of sand, gravel, and cobble on your beaches. And so one of the things you also want to make sure you do is if you're nourishing your beach, you're putting compatible material down so that you're not trying to put sand on a beach that will only hold cobble because it isn't going to last. So you need to make sure you look at what's on the beach from the native standpoint. So pros, again, this is for shore protection. It does a great job of dissipating wave energy. So one of the things that when we did the winter project, I went to a public meeting, and one of the things that people said, well, the only reason why beach nourishment is lasting is because we haven't had any winter storms. And as I showed you, it lasted right through Juno. But they looked at it and said, oh, it broke all the waves, so therefore the winter storm couldn't have been that bad. Well, you guys down here suffered a little bit more from Juno, and if that nourishment wasn't there, you'd probably feel a bit differently. The cons, obviously, is cost, from the standpoint that you have to do this episodic beach nourishment, re-nourishment, to maintain the volume of the beach, because you can't let the volume drop too low, because then you lose your shore protection benefit. Constructed dunes, these are a little bit different than nourishment. It's also a type of nourishment. But one of the things I pointed out, and it's just a quick thing, at Peggy Beach, is we want to look at this red line here, is the dune crest, and I'll talk about Peggy Beach later. But one of the things we want to do is we're looking at dune enhancement. We want to look at areas where the house is moving in front of the dune right now. So the dunes move past the houses, it's eroded and pushed back. So we may want to enhance the dune, give that protection back forward. And there are some rules to this. I'm not going to go over these in details, but basically, one of the things is there's something called the 540 rule. You want to get a certain amount of square footage area of the dune in order to withstand a 100-year storm event. Originally, it was a 540 rule. The Coastal Construction Manual actually suggests something almost twice that size. But again, it's trying to get a certain volume of dune so that it can withstand a certain storm event. A little bit of difference that you have. These are kind of hard and fast rules, these 540, 1100, is that most of your dunes are cobble. So they don't move quite as fast as, the ones that this rule was developed for, down in Florida or Virginia or Maryland. They're primarily sand. So, the volume of your dunes may not need to be up at this 1100, but maybe, something lower would be, something would be fairly lasting. So again, one thing I do want to point out is that they do protect very well during smaller storms, and this is without anything else. So if you have a good dune volume, it's going to withstand a smaller storm. But if your beach is gone, etc., it's not going to last through a larger storm. And again, from a pro standpoint, you can also try to make it last through bigger storms. You can enhance it with other methods, such as a beach nourishment. But similar to beach nourishment, the con is that you're going to have to maintain it. Right now, if I look at Hummerock, North Hummerock specifically, the town, you're ending up moving your dune back as it is now. So every time you get over top the road, you're ending up moving some material back, but at the same time, a lot of material ends up being lost in the long run anyways because it goes right over into your salt marshes. I do want to mention a couple of other, actually there's a bunch still left, but some of these methods that are maybe a little bit more far-reaching from a little bit more challenging from a permitting standpoint, I do at least want to give them some discussion. One of the things is offshore breakwaters. If you go up to Winter Beach is a good example. There's some up in Rockport that were built about 100 years ago. But there's some breakwaters. A breakwater is basically a mound of stone that you would build in the offshore area to break waves before they can get to the coast. And there's an example for some look at some of the stuff that we did at North Scituate. This is an alternatives analysis, and sort of the profile or the form of these is based on, kind of what the ones at Winthrop, the Five Sisters that you fly over when you come into Logan Airport look like. Going back a ways, this is something that I came across. There's actually a 1911 plan from a guy up in Quincy, civil engineer named Fred Tupper, who actually proposed a breakwater, and he spelled it B-R-A-K-E, as opposed to P-R-E-A-K, but I'm not going to criticize him for that. He actually proposed off of Minot Beach, a mile offshore, a very large breakwater. And so we actually took a quick look at that, what would it cost to build something like that, because that's pretty far reaching. But again, just looking at the footprint, and just what the footprint would be, about 250 feet wide at the bottom and 50 feet of water. And in today's costs, you're looking at something that being cost about $130 million just to build that breakwater to protect about 3,500 feet of shoreline. So, obviously it's not something that we can really consider now, but it was kind of entertaining to at least look at it. Thinking about something more realistic, one of the things we did look at, this is the Five Sisters up in Winthrop, but this, that profile, you're looking at still something that's about 100 feet across, width-wise at the bottom, and, again, similar length, about 3,000 feet. You're still looking at something that, on the order of $22 million to protect about 3,000 feet of shoreline. So, again, a really steep price tag, but it's something we considered. The one thing we, after looking at these, we really didn't see them as a viable solution. A, the cost, but B, the regulatory permitting for something like this, something that has not been constructed in Massachusetts, probably since this one was constructed in 1935, is something that would be extremely challenging and probably not worthwhile, especially knowing what the cost was. This is something a little bit different, something a little bit more innovative. One of the things that's very unique about this area is you have a couple areas, specifically Cedar Point and Egypt Beach, and I will talk about those in detail later, that you have these nice, what we call rocky intertidal platforms. So it's an area of glacial material that's where all the fines have been withered away, but you have this higher platform of natural rock material. And one of the things that you could do is actually enhance that with some larger stone, and it would still be rocky intertidal habitat, so you're not changing the habitat, and you can use that to help break wave energy. And so one of the things you could do is actually, it's just a quick example, Cedar Point, it's just, place large boulders. And again, this is not going to be something that is the end-all, be-all shore protection, but you certainly can, kind of have these spread out large boulders to protect the shoreline in these areas where you have that natural habitat that already exists. And again, this is, we want to point out that this is an enhancement of an existing habitat. So it's not like I could do this in an area that's sandy because the rocks would sink, or in an area that's a bedrock outcrop because you're not allowed to alter the actual makeup. But since you already have a whole series of boulder and cobble and gravel material out there, enhancing it with more boulders. And you actually see one of the glacial erratics here in the aerial photograph. That might be something that, it hasn't not necessarily been allowed, but could certainly be looked into. So again, it provides some wave energy dissipation like a breakwater, but it's not quite as good as a breakwater because it's not a solid structure, but it would be a spread out series of structures. So again, it would enhance that probably during some of the smaller storm events, but maybe not for larger storm events. They said they enhance intertidal habitat, which is a good thing. It makes permitting so much easier. But at the same time, one of the challenges is this is not something that is commonplace in Massachusetts. So, it's going to require some education and discussions with regulatory agencies before something like that moves forward. Elevate roads is the next alternative. We've looked at this for several locations, and one of the things we're trying to do is move roadways up, A, to get them out of some of the flood zones on the backside that are crossing the marshes, but also, for example, we've got Bailey's Causeway through the marsh, but also North Humrock, where that road is always getting covered with, your overwash dew. Is there an opportunity to try to get some of that out of the flood zone, because that is a very low-lying roadway in a very exposed area. And, again, we'll talk about site by site, but, the main thing here is in order, if we raise the roadways, we're really just trying to improve egress coming and going. Emergency egress is a critical thing in this town, especially for people who maybe not heed warnings and stay in their homes. For instance, in North Scituate, you may be in the southern part of Fourth Cliff, which is great, you're fine, but the problem is that the road to get out to you is completely impassable, and if something happens to you, it becomes an issue. And the other issue, and this is only for North Home Rock, which we'll talk about later, may offer some improved protection from a barrier beach being breached. And I already am losing my voice. This is going to be tough on me. Drainage basins, obviously one of the areas, in Oceanside, quite a bit of water there. There's a lot of talk about, and actually some going forward with engineering through a grant to try to get some of that water to drain more quickly. And the estimated cost of that is around $4 million. Next slide. So one thing I would like to point out is this does not reduce your flooding. Because all you're going to do in those areas is you're going to get rid of your floodwaters faster if the drainage is improved. The water right now is still going to come over the seawall. So really it's all about getting it so you're not having all that water ponded for days, but trying to get rid of it on a much quicker basis. Another quick one is looking at some of the pump stations. We've got a couple pump stations that are located in vulnerable areas, so we're looking at what you need to do some flood proofing of those buildings and or get the generators moved up so that you don't lose power and your ability to pump out sewage during the middle of the season. This is just to give you an idea of what an elevated generator, that's something that was I believe funded by the state for Oak Bluffs. So just getting that generator out of the high hazard flood zone so that you have the ability to make sure the pump works when it needs to work. It's obviously there's no cons, and we just want to make sure that we're getting that to work when we need it. Managed retreat. Everybody loves talking about this because everybody wants to move their house or run away. One of the things I want to point out, and we are going to be talking about this a bit, because when you start seeing some of the numbers of trying to maintain some of the areas here, it gets a little challenging. And obviously I'm showing Peggy each year, but this is just something that folks need to think about. And I'm always that deliverer of bad news, but there are areas where we might want to consider this. And it's kind of assessing how much it's going to take to move the houses versus how much it's going to take to try to maintain the shoreline. And it's something that the town, with the citizens, have to decide what's in the best public interest. We looked at this. It costs about $300,000 to move some house, and that's assuming that it's not on solid foundations. That's assuming that it's already up on piles as it is. So those costs could be higher if something on solid foundations. And so obviously the pro is that the residents, and obviously there's only in places where you have room to move, but obviously you're putting yourself in a place where you're a safer location. And obviously you're not going to do something like this. It's going to, if you move, it's going to give you 3 more years. You're going to move if it's going to give you 20 or 30 or 50 years of longevity for your property. And then obviously there's obviously the challenges. And again, the biggest challenge is property owner buy-in, as well as making sure that there's somewhere to move your house. Elevate homes, and what we point out here, you're not going to see a lot about this in this presentation, but obviously the town's been going through a lot with the green elevation grants, etc. But Elevate Homes, we pointed out that it's any building that's in the floodplain. So if you're in the floodplain and your house is getting repetitively damaged and you can raise it, it's a good thing to do. But again, that's not looking at a solution. It's kind of just a mitigation homeowner by homeowner. But it is something that we certainly would encourage people to do if it's doable. And I believe that's running at $175,000 on average per house. And I touched on this last time, and again, this goes to sort of that public-private partnership. One of the things that people love to do is protect their property, and I don't blame you, I protect mine too. I don't live on the coast, so I know it's a big surprise as a coastal engineer. But one of the things that I want to keep in mind is, one of the things that happens on these barrier beaches is you get a lot of channelization of flow. If your houses are close together, if there's a lot of hardened surfaces. One of the things I've had the opportunity to do is walk a lot of your shoreline. And one of the things I do see is there's, obviously a lot of people love to put a lot of concrete down, but that concrete channelizes flow. And it may not affect you right now, but what ends up happening over time is that's how the barrier beach starts degrading, is that you channelize the flow and you start creating some weak flow paths. Besides the fact they're not helping your neighbors, the weak flow path is where, if there is going to be a breach that forms, that's where it's going to form. So it may not seem like much, but when you do a lot of paved surface like this, yes, your pavement gets dug up and you can always go back and repave it. But that really is creating a very efficient way for water to flow right across the barrier beach. And it's scouring out everything on the backside, and it's just really exacerbating the problem. So anything you can do to try to reduce that is certainly a good thing. So elevate homes, the big takeaway here is the reason why you want to do it. It may be expensive, but it certainly is going to increase your property value, but it's also going to reduce your flood insurance rate. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. And the last, this is kind of a catch-all, but I do want to talk about this for a few minutes. The last thing I'm going to talk about before the break is innovative alternatives. There's a lot of these out there. We've got logs here, a wave break, flooding breakwaters. There's dune guard fencing. This is down here in the bottom corner. It says beach dewatering, which is something where they actually put tubes in the beach to drain into this. This drain is actually pushed into the beach, and all the water drains into that. So water uprushing the beach gets caught in these drains and flows into this big well, and that well pumps the water offshore. And the idea is that water that runs up then doesn't run back down the face of the beach, and therefore sand will preferably be caught on the beach. One of the things that I've seen on technology like this is if you actually do the calculations, it takes about as much energy to make this work as the waves have that are attacking the beach. So the amount of energy to actually make that work is tremendous compared to what your potential benefit are. But there are a lot of different technologies out there, and that's why, and like one thing I do want to point out is a lot of these technologies are based on existing shore protection methodologies. So if you have something like the wave attenuation devices, or in this case reef balls, these are basically kind of a different thing of looking at, a coral reef naturally attenuates wave energy, which is great. A breakwater, submerged breakwater attenuates wave energy. So these are kind of a bit of a play on those. This is geotubes. You could build a rock revetment, or you could build it out of these plastic tubes. The plastic tubes will go way faster. I will agree with that. However, they really function the same way a revetment functions. So a lot of these are sort of dependent on existing technologies. And one of the things that we came away with was really the kind of the likelihood of success. Again, you have to really look at your specific situation, where you have like high wave energy, high tide rate situation. A lot of these methods, especially like some of the reef ball type structures, if you're trying to keep them submerged, at high tide they don't work. So that becomes an issue. Something like geotubes or some of the more softer fabric type solutions, in the wave energy environment you're dealing with, they don't do very well. You've got a lot of cobble, boulders, etc. rolling in the surf zone. This stuff will disintegrate within about the first hour of a northeaster. So, a lot of these technologies, while they're great ideas, for this specific situation, they're kind of tough. And they certainly have their reef balls. This is something that people have looked into. I think one installation going in Connecticut in an estuary. We've actually looked at this type of technology down in Falmouth in one of the estuaries there, maybe to enhance at the edge of salt marsh. And then also wave attenuation devices. We've been involved with some design of those, again, down in the Gulf of Mexico, where you have a smaller tide range. So it's just one of those things that you just have to keep in mind. That all of these things have merit, but again, I think that the situation doesn't really warrant it. And with that, I'm going to take a break for intermission to get my voice back. And then I'll go south to north. The promise is that we are going to move from south to north through the town and kind of look at each area individually. So starting with, going from Humrock South and through Humrock North and all the way up to Minot Beach. And one of the things I do want to point out, one of the things that people have pointed out to me several times now, the way we've broken things up may not be exactly the way that you guys are familiar with them, the way they're named. And we may have named things slightly differently, but the way we named things, the way we came up with this, was based on trying to divide things up by the way coastal processes, or there's a good division for coastal processes, to make sure that when we're looking at things, that's a good division for us as far as looking. So that's why Humrock is actually broken up into two pieces. To start with, obviously the south, what we're talking about, Humrock South, is the area that is probably a little bit less damage on a typical storm than Humrock North, which is a very narrow barrier, but we'll get going. So Humrock South, one of the things I want to point out as we go through these, some of the numbers that I'm showing are pretty broad numbers. These are at planning level, but I wanted to give you guys an idea of what we're coming up with for numbers, because again, one of the things, there's some seawalls in South Humrock, so people talk that seawalls are a great solution. One of the things right now for a lot of what you call seawalls in South Humrock, they are really just retaining walls, for lack of a better way of saying it. If you're actually to construct seawalls because of where they are with some of the houses, you kind of need to do that whole procedure just like you do in Oceanside now, where you have to do quite a bit of holding up of the land feature while you're excavating the seawall down and building it. With that concept in mind, the seawalls for South Humrock would cost about $66 million. So these are some substantial costs. Building a new seawall sounds like a great idea, but that one of the reasons beyond the concept of where we say that the seawalls are a great idea. Historically, when they were built, a lot of the seawalls that we see, as you notice, were built well back on the beach. Well, we don't have that luxury anymore. We've lost a lot of beach in most of these areas, so one of the things they're doing is not even building a seawall further seaward, and those end up being more expensive because the foundation ends up being deeper. You sometimes are working in the wet, etc. So it really makes the cost go up quite a bit. Beach nourishment, when we're talking about beach nourishment for Humrock, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a second, we are looking at nourishing North and South Humrock together. The cost of that is about $12 million. And then constructed dunes, and this is like looking at this as a standalone without nourishment, is about $10 million. So first, looking at the seawall concept, one of the things we looked at, as I said, you saw that diagram that we had that looked at overtopping. So it's an acceptable overtopping or it's not an acceptable overtopping. So again, we're going to see a lot of these similar slides. And we're going to have tables like this. So under existing conditions, we calculate overtopping, and do you have any damage? No, you don't. So if the seawalls that exist there now, that's in pretty good shape. If we look at 2 feet of sea level rise, we're getting a lot more overtopping, and yes, we're going to have damage. Okay, so what we end up doing is an improved design where we raise the seawall up to a certain level, and even if we raise that seawall by 2 feet, we get a better condition under existing. But even if we raise all the seawalls 2 feet everywhere, under 2 feet of sea level rise, we're still getting damage. So this ends up creating a problem that yes, seawalls you can do, but even with that huge price tag, you really are not getting protection, assuming sea level rise goes up another 2 feet, which is actually pretty reasonable. We've had a foot of sea level rise over the last 100 years. It accelerates a little bit. 2 feet of sea level rise in the next 50, 75 years is really not something that we shouldn't expect. Beach nourishment, one of the things we do is we look at volumes of nourishment. And so when I'm looking at these are in cubic yards. So I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about those trailer dump trucks. They hold about 22 cubic yards per truck. So we're looking at tens of thousands of trucks in order to make a project like this happen. And so one of the things when you're looking at projects this size, you may be looking at other methods of getting material there. It might be offshore sand mining, it might just be pumping it into a barge and then pumping it out of the barge. They're trying to truck material, 800,000 cubic yards of material out to Humrock Beach would be a very tiresome for the town, I have no doubt. It's a very difficult area to get to, so that's a little bit more difficult. What we do is we plot up, actually do a modeling of the nourishment. So this is time in years, and this is percent of fill remaining. And one of the things I'd like to remind everybody when we do percent of fill remaining, that means when we put this template out, that means it's in the template. So the material that's lost in the nourishment is going elsewhere. Some of it's going offshore, but a lot of it's going to down-dip beaches. In this case, it's moving both north and south, so you're helping your friends in Marshfield, but you're also helping up in the Fourth Cliff area as well. So, the one thing, so we looked at two different size nourishments, one about half the other, one with a 50-foot berm, one with a 100-foot wide berm. And that berm is the flat part of the beach that goes out. And again, we're talking about putting this at a very high elevation, an elevation that storm waves can't overtop. So it's a berm elevation that's flat that goes out and then goes offshore at about a 1-on-10 slope, kind of like the native beach. And so that's a very wide berm, so that you're basically pushing the high water line. You might be pushing it out to 200, 250 feet. So it's not just a 50-foot wide beach or 100-foot wide beach. When you see that 50-foot wide beach, you may be pushing the water line out during typical times about a couple hundred feet. But again, you're looking at some significant dollars. And then obviously the larger fill lasts longer. And this 30% triggers, when you get down to about 30% of the volume, that's what you want to re-nourish. So if you go for that whole $26 million, you're going to get about 20 years of life out of that. If you go with about half the volume, you're going to get about 13 years. So it's from a beach nourishment standpoint, that's actually pretty good. That you're getting material that lasts that long, and depending on storm duration or storm frequency, it may last longer, it may last a little bit less. But again, if this material ends up going into South River or North River, it can be dredged and put back on the beach as well. So there is some recycling of sand. That's a very common thing to do if you're putting on the beach and it leaves your area and it ends up in a harbor, etc. That is certainly something that you could look at mining in the future. Constructed dunes. One of the things, again, we plot this line, and this is the line that the crest of the dune is at now. One thing that's nice about South Humrock is the crest of the dune is actually seaward of the houses. It doesn't seem like a big thing right now, but as we go through some of the other areas of town, this is a big thing. To have that dune crest in front of the seawall or the houses is actually a very good thing. And it allows you to do a nourishment that's a dune nourishment that's much smaller per linear foot. And so the way that would be done, again, we looked at that 540. We're trying to target 540 square feet per linear foot, that rule that we talked about. And again, this is just a planning concept. It might be slightly bigger, it might be slightly smaller than this. But that idea is so that size dune could withstand a 100-year storm is the idea. And so in order to do that, we're looking at if this is the houses that are in this area right near the crest of the dune, that we'd be putting the dune out in front. And so looking at costs, so if we were, and again, we wouldn't do all of these, but these kind of give you an idea of the different costs. For North Humrock, shorter distance, shorter area, same price per linear foot. At South Humrock, we really get $38 million if you want to do a seawall in that area. Same issues. Beach nourishment, doing North Humrock only is 4.1. We talked about the $12 million for doing both North and South Humrock, but we did look at just doing beach nourishment North Humrock just because that area is so susceptible. The constructed dunes, almost $10 million there. And again, it's a much shorter area, so it's about $10 million to do dunes in South Humrock, but it's a much longer distance. So it really tells you that we really need to add a lot more volume in North Humrock. We talked about elevating Central Avenue. Right now, that's kind of a placeholder that, somewhere around $3 to $4 million. And then managed retreat, which I'll talk about. In that case, there's really not a lot of place to move, so this is a lot of this concept of managed retreat would be potentially a buyout, and that's based on assessed value, but certainly appraised value would be higher, so that number is probably well on the low side. So one of the things that we looked at here in order to do a seawall in this area, because the beach is so narrow and the dune is migrated back so far, that in order to actually withstand overtopping, you not only need to build a seawall, but you're also going to need to build a revetment out in front of it just to break the waves. Because right now, under existing conditions, you're already getting damage. And obviously with 2 feet of seawall rise, you're going to get more damage. So even if we improve this design, where we're going up a couple feet with the seawall, over existing seawalls, elevations in the area, and putting this revetment out in front of it, on a barrier beach, which is, I've never actually seen one permitted in this state to be able to do something, a new structure like this. Even with that design, under existing conditions, yes, we can get to the point where we're not going to have damage. But with 2 feet of sea level rise, even with this design, you're still going to get damage. And that design would not last if you got 2 feet of sea level rise. So it gives you an idea of that substantial cost of $38 million just for less than a mile shoreline. It really is something that's really not going to get you where you want to go for very long. Beach nourishment, as I said, we've already talked about the north and south nourishment together. This is the north nourishment only. So we looked at a couple of different designs, again with a 100-foot wide berm or 50-foot wide berm, smaller volumes, shorter distance. But the design life, because when you do a short nourishment, it doesn't last nearly as long. One of the rules of thumb we have in coastal engineering, it doesn't always work out this way, but if you do a nourishment that's twice as long, it usually lasts about 4 times the duration. So that's kind of just a rule of thumb. So when we do a short nourishment like this, we can't really expect the design life to be all that good. So we're looking at between 2 or 4 years, and you're going to be out there re-nourishing. So this is a designed, engineered, very large volume over a short distance. Obviously, a lot of people who lived out there went through the nourishment that was done for back in the 90s, the FEMA nourishment. I'm not going to poo-poo FEMA, but the one thing I will say, that design was really not intended to do much of anything. That's not what, the type of nourishment we're talking about is to withstand a major storm. That nourishment was really just to get a very brief buffer, and it's not surprising it disappeared very, very quickly, just because of the way it was designed. Constructed dunes, the one thing you see on this, again, that red line starts sneaking back into the houses, and so it gets back to the point. And again, we know these dunes are heavily manipulated because the material goes in the roadway, it's pushed back forward. We're well aware of that. But even if you plot it out after it's been pushed back, it's still, the dune is underneath the houses, or in some cases behind the houses. So this is a situation where you're having some real problems as far as maintaining the dune. And so in this case, we're actually having to put the dune almost underneath the house, and it's a much larger volume of dune per linear foot in order to get to that point where we can withstand that 100-year storm event. So we're looking at, just for that, again, mile-long stretch of about $10 million. And this, this material for the dunes is a bit more expensive than the material for the nourishment, because it's basically, you're trying to bring in the cobble material you have. And so you're trying to bring in screen cobble material for these types of dunes. This is on the elevation of the roadway. You're going to see a lot of these as well for, like for Bailey's Causeway and some other areas in town. But the one thing, this is a LiDAR profile, so this is the elevation of the road from Barrett Street all the way up to River Road up at Fourth Cliff. So what we see, the dash line is the 10-year still water elevation. So no waves, no anything, just when you have a 10-year storm, that's where your water level is. And if you look at it, no big surprise, a lot of the road's already under it. And for the 100-year still water elevation, nearly all of the road is under that elevation. So one of the purposes here, again, we're trying to improve access during storms, and also, obviously you got a lot of overtopping and cobble built up on this road when there is overtopping. One of the ideas is to increase the elevation of the road so it acts more as a barrier to that material overwashing, but also gives you some elevation in the lesser storms, so you can certainly get emergency vehicles back and forth through there. So it's one of the things we're looking at. Again, it's about a mile long, and you're looking at right now, the number is around $3.5 million. And then managed retreat, and maybe I should just call this as more of a buyout for this. This is the one here in town where we just threw this out just to take a look at it. And you're looking at, over, since 78, and we've had about over $7 million of kind of loss claims, which certainly is not, is a minor reflection of what the damage is there. Obviously, there's been a lot of infrastructure damage, and not all of the stuff's been claimed, especially 1978, although FEMA was in existence, and we certainly had the flood insurance going on. A lot of people had not bought into the program yet, so the 78 storm really wasn't accounted for well at all. But if we look just at assessed value, if we wanted to try to buy out these houses, if there was any will to do that, or certain people wanted to get bought out, I mean, if you tried to do that as a massive buyout, you are looking at just an assessed value of around $56 million. And obviously, one of the things that everybody's aware of is that the houses tend to sell for well over assessed value in many of these areas. So that may not even be a realistic number. Next area, Fourth Cliff, and this does not include the federal portion of Fourth Cliff. This is only the area that's the privately held shoreline. We're trying to repair the revetment there. We're looking at $2.9 million, and I've already talked about elevating the road, which is the access to Fourth Cliff. And the way we came up with all of these improvements, whether some improvements were needed and some weren't, is we looked again at this, how much wave energy overtops the existing revetment in the shape that it's in now. So under existing conditions, you don't get damage, but you will, with a couple feet of sea level rise, you will start getting damage. So we looked at what would it take to upgrade that so you don't get damage. And that's where that $2.9 million comes from. Not a high priority. It might be easier to wait to the end. I can come back to slides.
Okay.
It's not a problem at all. Just because I've got a lot to get through, I'll be happy to answer those. Next slide. Third Cliff, again, same issues as some areas of Fourth Cliff. We've got $19.2 million. It's a much longer revetment. And then we can talk about elevating Gilson Road, which is a little bit easier than some of the other roads just crossing the marsh. And so again, similar problem. Under existing conditions, we are actually getting to the point where if we have a 100-year storm, we are getting problems as far as the way the revetment, the amount of overtopping on the revetment at Third Cliff. And so we're looking, and obviously under future conditions, you're making things worse. So we're actually looking at improving the design. But again, that has a hefty price tag. And again, if you look back at the prioritization, this is actually a relatively low priority, but again, we're including it. So that's around $19 million upgrade. And this is Gilson Road, so we're looking at elevating it. This is, again, there's a culvert in here. So this roadway elevation does not include the issue with the culvert, so there might be some additional costs with that. But we are looking at, potentially, and again, trying to raise that up so that during a storm, because there is no wave action here, if you want to be able to get across Gilson Road, again, for emergency egress, there's certainly some costs associated with that, but it's not really scary. Some of those costs we've seen at around $750,000. Peggy Beach. So going to Peggy Beach, we looked at quite a few options here. We looked at beach nourishment in the north part, which certainly is something that because that area is a little bit better protected. It's also where the public beach parking lot is. There might be some more public will to look at that. So we looked at nourishing just the north part. We also looked at nourishing the entire beach. And again, one of the things to keep in mind is this beach, because of lack of sediment supply, is eroding relatively quickly. So this is one of the fast eroding parts just naturally that this beach is moving back quite quickly. We did look at constructed dunes here as well, because again, we want to see if we can increase the volume and try to get some shore protection that way. And that's about almost $1 million there. If we only do it in North Peggy, we also looked at doing it in South Peggy only as well, $2.7 million. Again, South Peggy, one of the issues there is that that area is much lower, much more susceptible to the storm damage, and the houses are actually, as you'll see in a minute, are seaward of the Dune Crest. And then managed retreat here, this is actually a house moving issue, we think, as opposed to a buyout type option. So again, looking at the nourishments, one of the things we looked at these short beach nourishments just up in the north area to try to take advantage of maybe some of the more sheltered areas here where the houses are further back, and you actually have the town beach parking lot there. Obviously, the more used part of the beach. The one advantage here over Humrock and away is that the whole fronting beach is actually a public beach as opposed to Humrock, which is a private beach. We do have some significant costs, $1.5 million to $3 million just for this stretch here. And one thing is the design life is very short for two reasons. One is short nourishment, and the second is you have a really high natural background erosion rate. That beach is marching back relatively quickly. If we go to nourishing the entire beach, our longevity gets quite a bit more. We can actually get up to about a 9-year design life before you have to re-nourish again. But you're looking at going up to around $6 million. So some significant costs for protecting that area, but again, that's what you would need to do to try to get that level of protection. So again, we started looking at dunes, one of the things we want to try to make sure that we're looking at. And this, again, the red line here is the dune crest. And one of the things you do see is there's quite a few houses, especially the south part, that are seaward of the dune crest, quite a way seaward of the dune crest. This puts them certainly in a very high hazard area with a lot of FEMA damage, but also makes it much more challenging from the standpoint of doing nourishment as to what level of volume you have to add in order to get those dwellings protected. And so if we look at the north area, where the homes are actually behind the existing dune crest, it would really just have to enhance the dune crest, and that ends up being about $1 million to do that stretch of shoreline that's a little under 1,000 feet, 780 feet or so. So that's up in this area, and certainly we can be less volume as we move north from there. Down, going further south, it becomes a lot more challenging. As I said, that profile drops off relatively quickly. That area gets damaged quite a bit. And so we're looking at quite a bit of volume of dune that would be required. And so we have a shoreline length of about 1,000 feet, but we're looking at almost $3 million to protect that 1,000 feet of shoreline with a dune. So it gives you an idea of just within this very short stretch, kind of the difference of what you would need to do to protect one end of the beach versus the other. And then this concept of managed retreat. This is a little bit different than Humrock. Because the beach is moving back, because it's eroding so quickly, one of the things that's happening is it's overwashing. On the downside, it's covering over the salt marsh and back. It's certainly having an adverse impact on the salt marsh if you just look at it from the salt marsh standpoint. However, the way things are looked at in the state, natural overwash processes is part of what happens in natural barrier beach. Salt marshes are meant to be overtopped and go away as beaches march backwards. And sometimes the people will come out on the front side and look at some salt marsh on the front side over time. It's something we see quite a bit on the Cape. But this is a very common natural process. The barrier beach is meant to move backwards. To try to hold it in place, you're just going to need a lot of material and spend a significant amount of money. It's not that it can't be done. It's just that it may be very challenging. So one of the things with with this area is because you've had this overwash, that's no longer salt marsh. So now it's classified as dune. or Barrier Beach do. So one of the thoughts is that there is room potentially to move houses back. That area, especially in South Peggy, is now townland because it's overwashed with salt marsh. So there may be some opportunities to move homes back, and the lots on the north end actually get extended way back into the salt marsh right now. They have less need and less room to move back, but at the same time, it certainly could be done. And so one of the things we looked at was what what it would cost. So about $300,000 per house. Again, that's assuming that all houses are don't have solid foundations. And there may be one or two at the north end that do have some foundation difficulties, but certainly in the south end, all those houses are on elevated foundations. And so that's not a bad number. And so you're looking at about $5 million to move all those homes back. The assessed value of the homes is somewhere around $9 million, and the total repetitive loss claims over time period is $2.3 million. Kind of gives you an idea of just from a planning perspective. Next, Second Cliff. Again, a low priority area, but at the same time, certainly worth looking at. Again, because of the revetment condition that it's in, or some of the overtopping in different areas that happens, it's still a big price tag to try to repair these. Looking to the future, somewhere around $9 million. We're also looking at elevating Edward Foster Road in two sections. The one section that's between the cliffs, and the one section that goes back to the mainland. So revetment is Second Cliff. This revetment is certainly again under existing conditions and with 2 feet of sea level rise. If it is during existing conditions, it certainly is with 2 feet of sea level rise. We're getting quite a bit of overtopping. That's allowing damage during water storm events. So if you want to upgrade that so that it doesn't have a problem during existing conditions and during 2 feet of sea level rise for a 100-year event, we're talking about doing something more like what you have at Third Cliff with the flattened portion of revetment, and the cost of doing that is about $9 million. Edward Foster Road. This is obviously by the marina here. The seawall has been redone here, but this area, again, obviously is overwashed over top, but the road itself is very low, so it really does cut off access to the cliff. So one of the things we want to look at is potentially raising that. Again, for the most part, the elevation needed to raise it is actually relatively modest. And again, we're only looking at still water elevation, so this would be flooding from the backside. So you see this is a shaded area. These are areas below the 10-year and 100-year flood, so you can kind of see that just from the backside you can get flooded. So one of the things we'd like to do, just to keep the access, egress going, is to raise that road so that at least from the backside that you're not dealing with the flooding issue. Right, ask me the question after I finish because it'll be easier. I mean, I know that all of you guys, every section I go through, I could stop for a while, but I'm certainly more than happy to answer your question. Next one. Edward Foster Road going to the mainland. The one nice thing is we don't have to redo the bridge because the bridge is actually an elevation that's okay. Because that would bump this cost up quite a bit. But to try to raise that again through the salt marsh, quite a bit of it. Again, these are the contours. Quite a bit of the road here is well below the 10-year storm surge elevation. So again, bringing that up. But again, that's going to be about $2 million cost to have that done. Edward Foster Road. Okay, so this is the Edward Foster Road, the seawall area you were talking about. So we're looking at, in that area, $7.8 million for the seawall revetment in the Edward Foster Road in between the two cliffs. And again, the elevation of the roads, same thing that you've already seen. So this is that area where the seawall has been redone. Just south of there, in this area here. In order, right now, the overtopping isn't too bad, but with 2 feet of sea level rise, we're going to get a situation where we do have serious overtopping problems. So again, we're looking at improving that. If you want to look at trying to get that up to a situation where it's protected under a 100-year storm, under existing conditions, and with 2 feet of sea level rise. And I know I'm repeating myself quite a bit, but I just want to make sure I'm touching it in every area. And that would be about $7.8 million to do that. First cliff, blessing of blessings. And actually the revetment can protect to all levels of that we need right now. Even with 2 feet of sea level rise, it's actually in good condition to withstand that. So we are actually looking at not having to do any repairs. So it's just maintenance for there. So there's really no cost of doing that. So the only cost is the access, the egress over Edward Foster Road. Cedar Point. One of the things that we have seawall that runs around there. In order to do the repairs to that, we're looking at $10.4 million. It's a relatively short stretch. That seawall is in, the public seawall there is in pretty bad shape, but some of the private seawalls along there are in very bad shape, based on our look. Beach nourishment, and this is not nourishment on the front of Cedar Point. It's actually to the north of Cedar Point, and you'll see that. It's more of a cobble nourishment than kind of true beach nourishment. And there's the boulder dike that I talked about earlier, which is kind of spread out boulders, and again to dissipate wave energy, because you take advantage of that existing rock platform you have in front of Cedar Point. So the first thing is you have about 1,300 feet of seawall. One of the things you notice is under existing conditions, you guys already know that you suffer quite a bit of damage in that area. 2 feet of sea level rise, you can suffer more. With an improved design where you actually have a pretty broad revetment out in front of it to try to dissipate wave energy and raise the seawall 2 feet. Under existing conditions, you can get to the point where you're not having damage behind the seawall, or at least not significant damage. But under 2 feet of sea level rise, just because of the elevation of the area, you're still going to suffer pretty badly. So by itself, it's a tough sell, but you're looking at about $10 million for that 1,300 feet stretch. The nourishment option, this is a little bit of a different kind of nourishment. We're looking at more of a coarse grain nourishment in this area. And the one thing that's kind of nice is because of the protection that Cedar Point kind of sticks out, and actually kind of acts as a natural groin to prevent material from leaving, because the direction of transport here is generally from north to south. So if you put the material in, which the solid red line, over time it actually just kind of ends up building up in that corner. So it really never, quote unquote, disappears. You're going to have some cross-shore loss, but if you put coarse grain material in there, it's actually going to widen out the beach quite well. But again, the cost is not insignificant. It's about $4.5 million to do that. But will certainly protect that area all along where the causeway is. One thing I'd like to point out, because it is a cobble nourishment, it's a little bit different than a beach nourishment. You put in, this is where the seawall is, and this is what the profile looks like now. You put in the 2 different designs we looked at. But over time, what ends up happening is it gets kicked up into where you actually, this is the scale squished in the horizontal, but your actual cobble berm is actually going to be a little bit higher than your seawall. It's not uncommon, because your seawall is not all that high there relative to the waves. So the waves actually push the cobble berm up higher, but that would be 20, 25 feet away from the seawall and the slope going up. It would be about 2 feet higher than the height of the seawall and it slopes offshore. So this is a little bit different than your typical nourishment that just kind of the beach gets taken away, and over time this actually gets pushed up into a natural cobble berm, something like what you see at Man Hill. And then the other concept is this concept of like these glacial erratics, these larger boulders. One of the things you can do is you can put them in rows. And again, this is ends up being, because it is using native material, it's an actually enhancement to the existing rocky habitat. But it also you can get the elevation of these up to near the the 10-year or even 100-year still water elevation, so you can actually use these as a breakwater to break wave energy. So you'd be looking at, again, these are, obviously hundreds of boulders like that interspersed in rows. And because they are, you're not building a solid structure, it looks like a big footprint, but the cost is only around $720,000 to do that for Cedar Point. One thing I will point out about that is that would protect you during minor storms, but during major storms, that methodology, similar to some of the innovative technologies, is not going to dissipate all wave energy, but it will certainly help reduce wave energy. Now getting to Oceanside, this is probably the big price tag, but you've already seen some of the seawalls going, some of the improvements in the seawalls going in there. If you were due to do the repair or redo the seawall along the entire Oceanside area, you're looking at about $80 million for the Oceanside area alone. If you did beach nourishment, you're looking at about $7 million, but there are some issues with that, which I'll talk about. We've talked about the drainage improvements that are, the town's looking at doing the engineering design for that. Right now, the estimate for those drainage improvements is about $4 million. But again, that doesn't solve anything. What it does do is it reduces the time that you're suffering from a flood, but it doesn't reduce the flood level. And then we talked about the pumping station there, the $140,000 improvement. So one of the things that we, again, similar slide to everything you've seen. Oceanside is again, the seawall's low. We know that. The houses are right up against the seawall. We know that as well. Really tough area. Probably one of the toughest areas in Massachusetts to deal with from a coastal engineering standpoint. Right now, these yeses are the bad thing. You're suffering quite a bit from overtopping right now. It's going to get worse with sea level rise. So we're trying to improve the design rather than just having that little bit of a toe revetment. You're actually talking about more of an organized revetment in front. And we can certainly get to a condition with a 2-foot increase to deal with existing conditions, but again, there's going to be suffering if you get more sea level rise. And to do the 2 miles, you're looking at somewhere around $80 million cost. We looked at nourishment. In this case, the nourishment, the design life of the nourishment isn't bad. The one issue with the nourishment here is if you put this material in, it disappears in the northern half very, very quickly. So it kind of all congregates down in the southern half or goes up here. And the other concern for nourishment in this area is because you nourishment can have a sediment, which would be kind of a sand gravel mix. It's quite possible, actually know, that a lot of this material would end up in the harbor, which is something that we're certainly not in favor of. Egypt Beach has some issues on its own. We'll talk about these in a minute, but Egypt Beach is kind of a special challenge for us. It certainly has some flood damage issues, but it also has kind of a variety of other resources that some other areas of town don't have. So we did look at constructing dunes standalone at about $800,000, and this boulder dike concept for about $1.4 million, and a pump station there in the parking lot you're well aware of, and that's again just retrofitting that. The dune, again, the volume is just a little bit on the low side, so one of the things that can be done would be enhance that dune. Not that big of an issue here, so it ends up being around $800,000, but certainly not anything that's out of extraordinary compared to some of the other areas. This is a longer boulder dike here. One of the issues we have that is very unique to this area is we have salt marsh. And for anybody who's ever had to deal with regulatory permitting, salt marsh is a very difficult issue, and you're not allowed to impact it. So beach nourishment at Egypt Beach is really off the table because you would be having an adverse impact to salt marsh. So one of the things we looked at, and sort of when we came up with this dike concept, was this whole concept of putting these boulder dikes out here, again enhancing that rocky area. But also dissipating wave energy not only for the homes, but actually this turns into an enhancement of the salt marsh. So it gives you an option, but again, there's really not many other choices for Egypt Beach. Manhill Beach, we looked at constructed dunes and managed retreat. Managed retreat in the same manner that we talked about with Peggotty, although there's certainly some property issues we are well aware of, but it's not something that can certainly solve in this report. So looking at the constructed dunes, $2 million, and managed retreat about $1.5 million. And so with that, we did look at where the dune line is again, and obviously the homes are similar to the southern portion of Peggotty. Some of the homes are in front of the dune. That certainly creates a problem, and we know that that's going to be a large volume for dune, the dune replaced or replenished. And so again, very similar to what Peggotty Beach looks like, where this is the home, this is the existing dune kind of behind the house. We'd be looking at establishing a new dune out in front and getting that volume up to that 540. And that's going to be about $2 million, but keep in mind that's only a stretch of beach that's about 700 feet long. So that's quite a bit of material for a very short stretch. And we also looked at the homes that are out on the beach. There's 5 homes. And so we did look at, again, to pull them back $300,000 per house, we'll get $1.5 million. Obviously, one of the issues is there's certainly property issues here where the homeowners really don't have any room, properties that they do own, and the town doesn't own that land, so that certainly is an issue. There have not been a lot of repetitive loss claims on this beach, but that doesn't necessarily mean there hasn't been a lot of damage. Moving up the Surfside, seawall and revetment. If you're going to redo that, we'll look at $21 million for Surfside. And then beach nourishment, this is combined with North Scituate. So that's a project that's ongoing right now. This is the design and permitting phase, and that would be about $13 million. And so this area, if you're doing a standalone revetment, obviously some of the seawalls have failed here. The seawalls are in tough shape. We don't really have much of a beach, certainly no high tide beach. So we are looking at, in order to create a situation where we're not having problems, because we are getting all that overtopping again during existing conditions, but just to try to upgrade that, we're looking at a pretty massive revetment out in front of the seawall that's raised 2 feet. And we're looking at, similar to all the other areas down the Oceanside, really a pretty significant cost. So for 2,700 feet, we're looking at about $21 million. And then looking at this is the beach nourishment from North Scituate and Surfside. We're looking at a design life somewhere around 9 years. One thing that should be pointed out, as I've mentioned about beach nourishment, we generally have a north to south drift here. So nourishment that's placed here would actually benefit Manhill, as well as Egypt Beach in the long run. But the idea is certainly it's a shore protection for the North Scituate, the Surfside area. So we're looking at about $9.4 million for the total cost of that. And that's for a 9-year design life right now. So that right now, we're in the process of permitting that. It's about to be submitted to the Conservation Commission, the first half of that, which is the North Scituate half, which will be followed in the future by trying to expand that down to the Surfside. North Scituate Beach, again, we've already talked about that from the nourishment standpoint. Seawall and revetment, looking about $14 million there. And then Bailey's Causeway, which will come up a few times here at under $700,000. And so again, everybody knows what that looks like. It's just some boulders put in front of the seawall right now. Really, again, similar to Surfside, and we're enhanced that. We're looking at putting a total revetment out there. If we're doing a standalone, this was reviewed before, but you're looking at construction cost about $15 million for an 1,800 foot of section there along planes. And then, again, it really gets only to the situation where we're protecting under existing conditions if we do that. Again, at sea level, but at sea level rise, it's not going to be that. And then elevating Bailey's Causeway, again, we're looking at, again, same problem. The roadway elevations across these marshes are relatively low compared to the 10-year still water elevation and the 100-year still water elevation. So we're looking at raising that roadway at the cost of $675,000. And that's carried here from Minot Beach, because obviously it's the access to Minot Beach as well. Seawall, right now the seawall section we're looking at improving potentially is only north of where that boulder dike sits on front of the seawall. And if we did the seawall in the south section, we're looking at a much larger cost, around $9 billion. That's 2.7 for the north section north of where that dike is in front of it. We also looked at enhancing that revetment dike to knock down waves and reduce storm damage. That would cost about $5 million. We also looked at what I call Perch Beach. I can look at beach nurseries here, but it's actually filling in the area between the dike and the shore with column material. And then it ended up being only about $600,000. So rather than doing the revetment dike, improving that, this ends up being a much more cost-effective way of dealing with it. And then we also have safe dike payments cost ways are needed. So the north section of Minot Beach, this is the area that doesn't have the dike in front of it. Obviously we're getting over the top now, so improving it is actually just looking at raising the seawall a couple feet. So that's about $2.7 million. That's up in this area here, where you have a little bit of protection from the rocks offshore. And then if you wanted to do the south section and you wanted to raise that seawall, this is the dike that we have offshore. But if you want to raise that seawall section, then that's a much longer section, and that was the only solution we're going after. In order to get protection, we're looking at $9.5 million to do that. So rather than doing that, the next option we looked at actually enhancing the dike. So building up that dike so it actually is breaking waves before they hit the seawall, and then we leave the seawall at the elevation that it's at now. So with that, it ends up in a cost of $5 million, a bit lower, rather than raising the seawall. So that was something that was looked at favorably. But the other option is actually filling in this area with about 18,000 cubic yards of cobble. And that will actually, you actually have something offshore to hold the cobble, so you're not going to lose that material, and it's just going to get slowly reworked over time, and the cost for that is actually quite a bit lower, $600,000, and it actually does provide the same level of protection as the last two things that you just saw. Okay, so I'm going to try to summarize this the best way I can. And again, I know that I've jumped through everything very quickly, and I know you guys are going to have a ton of questions depending on what area you have. But I did want to sort of give you guys an idea of what we're looking at. So we had looked at, and this is sort of what kind of our general recommendations are. So this does not include every alternative and doing it all at once. This actually includes what we would potentially suggest is probably the best, most cost-effective way of going at it. So you're going to see red, I believe yellow and green. So this is the high priority areas. This is the big ticket items. So for Oceanside, Hummerock, Cedar Point, Peggy Beach, and Surfside, these areas that would deem highest priority under our rating system, if you were to do all the work that we recommend, and that's the list of the recommended options, you're looking at $143 million outlay. So this is a substantial cost, obviously, to the town. But again, this is if you had your dream of trying to put together a program that was going to give you a resilient plan, this is the level of funding that was required for this area. For the yellow areas, it goes down quite a bit. It's about $7 million. And again, I'm throwing this ongoing maintenance because that's something you also have to consider. But this is North Scituate, Hummerock South, Minot, Manhill Beach, Egypt Beach. These are that next level, but still leading. But again, the price tag's quite a bit less. So obviously they're high priority areas. And the reason why they are high priority areas is because the ones in the most need obviously have substantially higher costs than these mid-level areas. And then the lowest level areas, which is again, Third Cliff, First Cliff Center, Fourth Cliff, no surprise, and then the Edward Foster Road that just had some seawall repairs done to it. You're looking, where most of that dollar is going to be spent, you're looking at somewhere around $8.6 million under recommended, because we're not recommending some of the upgrading Third Cliff seawall that's right now, but rather living with it the way it is. And again, I'm going to throw that lovely slide up here. So you saw big dollar items. I see you guys are obviously going through a school rebuilding, which we did. I live in Falmouth, so we did that not so long ago. And we're going through our whole process of, we're actually getting sewers now, which you guys already have. So I understand the big ticket items and how scary they can be, certainly from a homeowner in these types of communities. But certainly this is going to require, obviously, a lot of input from the private sector, government, and that common interest. Where does the town want to go? What needs protecting? Because these are some big ticket items. But obviously these are some of the highest value properties in town too, and the taxpayer pays quite a bit into the system. So completely understanding that, I just want to point out that there's obviously something that needs to be shared amongst everyone. And then a couple things I want to point out before I finish off. So what's underway right now? I'm going to point out what the town is doing. Obviously, up with Foster Road, that seawall is repaired. What's underway right now, there's a couple projects, seawall repair projects on Oceanside. We're in the process of permitting North Scituate beach nourishment. The South River dredge project is in permitting. Somebody asked me about this at break, actually. And that permitting is trying to beneficially reuse that material as nourishment. So the idea is not to get rid of that material. And certainly I'm a proponent of any material that's dredged if it can be used to enhance the littoral system, even if it's not for an engineered project, but just getting it back into the littoral system is a great idea. So putting it on the beach is fantastic when you do that. Also underway are 14 elevation grants to FEMA. There's pending an additional 7. And then there's other things pending. The town obviously has a bunch of grant applications in, etc., that they're looking at doing on this Oceanside drainage. I talked about getting design and engineering. There's also some pending grant for working on another section of Oceanside, 7th Avenue, and there's a grant application in for at least evaluating raising Central Avenue and looking at doing a beach nourishment in the North Hummerock area. So next steps, where are we? Our job is to complete the draft report that we have, and we've been writing it. So a lot of what you're going to see, you're going to see in the draft report, and it's our job to get that to the town by the end of this month. So we're busily writing, and Rebecca is kind of being sick of writing at this point, but that's what we do as engineers these days. And then the town and coastal zone management, which funded 3/4 of the grant, is going to review that over the summer. Obviously, get back to us with comments. We'll finalize the report, and then it will be released to the public. So I'm not sure exactly when that's going to be right now, so it depends on the review. But certainly, in the next few months, expect to see that hitting the street. And then the town's obviously continuing to work on the infrastructure that they have. We mentioned the grants that are out there, and I'm sure as more grant opportunities come up, that the town will certainly be applying for those. And with that, I'm going to open up for questions.
Does that include?
I'll repeat the question.
Does that include the some structure to prevent breach between the ocean and South River?
So the question was, when looking at elevating the roadway at Central Avenue in North Hummerock, whether that's going to include some sort of structure to prevent the barrier beach from breaching. So with that, right now it does not. That is certainly something. One of the things is trying to get these beaches to act as natural as possible. So if you look at our alternatives, one of the things is not just raising the road, but it's also looking at enhancing the beach and the dune. So those would serve to provide that level of protection. So it's not just raising the road by itself.
Just a quick question to follow up. What would you recommend to the town?
You can go this time. Sure.
How does the town take care of the people that live there? an emergency situation, what can we do?
Excuse me, Sean, can you take the mic to the people that are asking the question, or someone, so, or I'll do it. Yeah, or I'll walk around with it, it's really hard for people to hear. It's hard to really hear. We're getting someone to come, yeah.
All right,
They're
can you hear me now?
live.
That's good. I was asking the question, what would they recommend as consultants to the town in case this winter or within 5 winters from now, there is a breach? How do you repair it? How do you keep emergency access? How do people get back and forth to work? How do kids go back and forth to school?
I think one of the things I'd point out, so this is, as much as it's a unique situation, this is not unprecedented. Down in North Carolina, they've had a couple of these, and one of the things that happens when you do these is you can put in what they've done in North Carolina, and it might be something that we'd recommend here, is you may put in a temporary structure to try to get access back, but generally what they've done is they've filled the breach with nourishment to build the barrier beach back up so that it's no longer is the weak spot. And so it's not a cheap thing to do. Historically, it's not down in North Carolina because, again, it's this public-private issue. In those areas, those are generally done by the Army Corps of Engineers. Here, it may also be a FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, town, combined type thing to actually do that. So as much as I can say, if it's all, I'd be involved, and I may very well be representing the town, my recommendation would be you need to get the road open as quickly as possible. So you're probably going to put in some sort of temporary structure. But overall, that temporary structure, you still have the weak spot of that narrow barrier. So one thing you need to do if you want to maintain that barrier in the long run is widen that barrier so it is so it is no longer the weak spot. So that's the critical issue. If that makes sense.
Just to answer your question, we actually do have a plan in place in the event in that area of breaches. Kevin, our DPW director, is along with the fire chief. In essence, we have like a structure, a bridge. And for the past 3 or 4 years, we've been actually prepared in the event that we needed for temporary fix to be able to gain access, because ultimately it's the emergency access to get to the residents as well as to have the fire and police be able to get them. Next question. Dave?
Yeah, I'm sure the Scituate Coastal Coalition is going to have a great deal to say about this study, and my comment is I just hope the town will pay some attention to what the coalition has to say.
Dave, this is for everybody, Coastal Coalition included, you, everybody. I'm sure many people are from the Coastal Coalition. This is, as I said, and I didn't get to finish what I was thinking earlier, this is like your master plan if you're thinking about planning for your town going forward. This is, in essence, the master plan for this town, something it hasn't had. So I think this is invaluable for us to take a look at. There are so many options here for different areas that various people, neighborhoods are going to probably say, this is more important to us. And they're going to have to speak for their neighborhoods because that's what the town needs to hear. It's a local area that needs to be able to identify what their needs are and what their wants are. To the lady right here who has the poster, I guess.
You can see the rebar, you can see where it's collapsing.
I don't know what bridge you're talking about. Yeah,
We've done it across the road, that is supposed to be in very good shape. This is the wall on every across the road that's some member of the board. Oh no, that wasn't the stone wall, that was the wall that over the
Give her the mic, please, so we can hear what she's saying.
plans of 39. You can keep those. This is the seawall that holds the... This is the seawall that holds
Rosemary, we're getting the lights. The janitor right now is left, and we're trying to get the light key to be able to turn the lights on, okay? So everybody understands, we're not trying to keep you in the dark there.
This is the 1937 map when the road went in by the Corps of Engineers. And this is the seawall that supports the road going round from Edward Foster Road. It shows you on this map that there is a seawall. Mr. Delhi was told that it wasn't there. It is there, and it's washing away. And we have people coming from First Cliff, and we have that's a low priority. This is the seawall this is the bridge under the bridge where it's collapsing in places. You can see where it's fallen out. These pieces all fit together. And I'm asking you, wouldn't that be a priority? We took this there, and they all used the bridge. It was only fixed, we only had it done about 6 or 7 years ago, and already there's all concrete collapsing round. We've put a load of brick stones there in front of it now, a load of stones, and the stones, when the water comes in, only rubs up and only will create a bigger problem.
Basically the question is Edward Foster Road. Obviously it's one of the areas that we're looking at elevating. I think the one thing that I'd like to point out, the primary focus of the study was looking at the open coastal areas and trying to evaluate those. One of the things that we came across was because these roadways are so low, whether it be Bailey's Causeway or Edward Foster Road or any of these roads that are servicing these various areas are so low, it is something we want to look at elevating. Now again, from a prioritization standpoint, the way that we looked at it, we have to go through our prioritization criteria as the way we looked at kind of human health and safety issues. Because when it really comes down to Edward Foster Road, Edward Foster Road itself is only overtopped during a portion of the tide when you have a storm. So the thing is, it is accessible. We didn't evaluate the exact condition of every bridge or etc. But at the same time, we did acknowledge that this needs to be elevated. What I said was the bridge is at a good elevation. It's not necessarily the bridge in great shape. So the elevation of the bridge is okay. So the rest of the road just needs to be elevated. Right, we didn't say that there's not a wall there. It's not, the issue of the wall is actually, it's a good thing. Okay. Okay, but that's...
Next question.
My question is regarding your comparisons of seawall revetment costing X and beach replenishment costing Y. And I understand that a focus of what you're supposed to be aiming to study at, but my question is, if you had a seawall that lasted like the one that they just replaced out by the Foster Road, it was just shy of 40 years old, in that section because they replaced it after the 70s. Okay? That lasted 40 years. And some of these other areas that you're talking about just putting beach replenishment, you're talking about a 9-year element. And to multiply those out and take into consideration two things. First of all, the cost of replenishing those for 40 years or 50 years. And some of our schools are 100 years, and yeah, they're in bad shape, but they're 100 years old doing a portion of their job. So those comparisons need to be made. And the second point is what areas of town did those seawalls protect? For instance, what is the infrastructure in back of those seawalls that a beach replenishment wouldn't do as good a job at because we walked away in 9 years and say, year 10, we had a major storm, and there goes your major infrastructure. Was any of that figured into your calculation?
The longevity is figured in our calculations. It's not figured into what you're seeing here, but it is certainly, we have a life cycle cost. So
9 years for...
Well, so we're anticipating there's a life cycle cost that after 9 years you replenish.
Right. So
okay.
After $9 million, you have to multiply out the...
I'm well aware. Exactly. So which is so.
Did you do those comparisons?
Those comparisons are done in the report. They're not done here, but they are done in the report. I think the thing, as far as the seawalls go, I think the one thing to point out, and again, we are. There are certain areas where seawalls do work, and there's certain areas where seawalls are more problematic. And again, it's hard to go into enough detail in a presentation like this. One thing I will point out is that in areas where seawalls work, we try to take advantage of the seawalls that were there. For example, Oceanside, we don't have a lot of other choices. So that's why that's still on the table. Some of the other areas, and I know that there's always a lot of people from Hummerock. Hummerock is a tough place to not only for seawalls work, but Hummerock's a tough area where seawalls actually aren't permittable. So I'm putting them on the table. Yes, you can look at it, but you will spend the next 25 years trying to get it permitted, and you will get turned down. Because that's the way the regulatory environment works. You are on a barrier beach. If you have an existing seawall, yes, you can probably get away with repairing it. If you expand the footprint, you're going to have a really hard time, and you're going to be paying. And one thing we did not include in this is extensive mitigation requirements that you would be required to do even if you were allowed to build it, which would be tens of millions of dollars on its own. So I hear what you're saying, and I hear the frustration. The one thing I'm hoping that I'm trying to get across is that a lot of people feel that seawalls are the panacea, that they do protect, and they do to an extent. But I think the one thing I do want to get across is they are giving you a false sense of security. Because when they do fail, they fail catastrophically. These are the nourishment, you can see it going away. You can get on the phone, over the years and say, our nourishment's going away. We need to re-nourish. You know where it's at. These seawalls, when they go, and we look out at Hull and some other areas, when it goes, it's gone. And everything behind it disappears just like that. So, I just want to get that point across. I'm not a proponent of seawalls. I'm not a proponent of beach nourishment. What we try to do is look objectively, the best way we could, at different areas, and try to look at what would work in the long run, and trying to make recommendations. And certainly the recommendations would be based on life cycle costs. So, including re-nourishment. Okay?
So maybe.
Let's get to it. How many people have questions? Just raise your hands right now, okay? And I'm only saying because I want to make sure we get time for everybody. And then we can go back a second time for second questions, okay? Follow up. In the back. Yep.
Hi, I have a question about Peggy Beach. It was in a high priority category. And yet, in the end, the only recommendation was the south of Peggy Beach to the creek. There was no recommendation for nourishment. And I'm a little baffled by that because it is a public beach, whereas you have many beaches, Hummerock, etc., that are privately owned. Why was that not put out there to nourish it? If it's ruining the marsh, which will eventually encroach on Kent Street, St. Mary's Church, the harbor. I don't understand why it's like retreat south of Peggy Beach. I don't get it. It's the public beach.
I was actually retreated north and south Peggy Beach, but
north too?
Yes.
You don't need to retreat.
Okay.
I don't understand why was it nourished?
Hang on a second. So let me answer the question. So what it really comes down to is what we looked at is cost versus what the property's worth, etc. So one of the things that we're looking at is, yes, you can do a nourishment. It's short-lived, and the town may have a desire to do that. From a coastal shore protection process, I have a hard time justifying, because of the short design life of a nourishment, I have a hard time justifying it from a shore protection standpoint. From a public access and public benefit standpoint, which is not something I'm specifically looking at as a, what does this bring to the town as far as recreational benefits, I'm not doing that. This is strictly okay, this is what the properties are worth, here's how many properties are here. If I was doing this as a shore protection only, the retreat option gives you the most longevity at the lowest cost. And that's what I was looking at. So, it may not be what you want to hear, and I completely understand it. But the thing is, you have a beach that is eroding relatively quickly, and nourishment is something that can work, but it's going to be expensive. And so again, this is something that I'm not saying is not a good thing. I would love to see nourishment everywhere from a standpoint of a public beach because people love it. But at the same time, from a standpoint of a shore protection, it's hard to justify.
That erosion that you're speaking of is not erosion. I really think you need to get your facts straight on that. And I know you've done a good job. It's a great presentation, I must admit. though the town has had a study like this done as way back as the 50s. But the point I want to make is that that marsh has been filled in because we had a dune. We had a dune that the town selectmen took down last year. And all of that sand retreated into the marsh. It was never like that. It has not been doing that. Southern side, yes, but not the northern side. The northern side, it's been studied and already documented, and DEP approved that beach nourishment is the best way to handle the northern part, which is the public beach. The town selectmen choose not to respect that. And I'm very disappointed in the fact that, that we're just so disrespected as a public beach, as citizens that abut that public beach.
Look, we're not here, standing here, to be told that we're being disrespected. We have just spent, or the town and state has spent through this to hire experts, your town. How many towns have done this? Have gone out of the way to be, excuse me, I let you speak now. You've got to understand, we have to have a discussion back and forth. We can't talk over each other. We're trying to put together as a town solutions. Do you think I want to say to people, or you want to say to people, retreat? Do you realize the cost, the takings, the fundamental cost for every taxpayer if somebody says we've got to move your house? Because they're going to sue the town. They're going to say, you're not getting the assessed value, you're getting the fair market value. That's millions and millions of dollars. We're talking about different solutions, whether it's seawalls, whether it's beach renourishment. I think it's really invaluable to be able to listen and see what are the options out there. 6 years ago, this discussion never happened. Now we're trying to have a discussion about what are the future what are we going to be doing going forward. You can disagree reasonably, okay? So let's move on to the next question. I'm happy to be back the second time to ask you whatever the question. As far as comments, let's try to keep it positive, please.
Well, I do want to...
This lady right here, please. Go right ahead.
Two-part question. You talked about possibly raising the height of Central Avenue, and I wondered how much of a height you're talking about with the idea of access into our properties where we don't have driveways. And the other half of that is beach nourishment. You talked about quite a bit of height on that. For those of us who currently have a patio attached to a seawall, would the beach nourishment be above that height?
Good question. The first question is, I think we are looking at about 2 feet. And so in most areas, it's not a problem. I do realize there's a bunch of houses there that are in solid foundations, and there may need to be some accommodation. But we did look at it in great detail. I had walked the area, and I did see that there are certainly some issues. And but the concept is to try to make it work. And so we're not looking at raising 5 feet. We're talking about raising 2 feet. And that is something that may need to be looked at in more detail. As far as the other question you have, at least based on what I know about the seawalls there and the elevations, the nourishment would not go over the top of those. It's not something that's going to block views or anything of that sort. That is, but the elevation of your patios, the nourishment may be up to that elevation.
Thank you.
To your point, I think there have been just ideas. For example, your septic systems, if they're lower than the roadway, I think that is a consideration long-term that we're going to have to look at, because I think there's a huge cost there, definitely. So your point is well taken. The road goes up. There are other structures that I think as a town, again, in a cursory review looking at this, that's going to be a more detailed look if that is going to be a selection. It's a good question. I'm sorry, this gentleman has been asking and waiting, and I apologize.
John Oregon, we've been here about 60 years. You talk about the town being proactive. Then they say when the ocean breaks through at the narrow point, we're going to put a bridge in. Don't do anything to prevent it breaking through. We're going to put a bridge in. With the bridge, we're going to be without water, without electricity, without propane to heat. There's over 30 homes in the cliff that year round. You have the Air Force Base up there. Unfortunately, with the Air Force Base, if they put the armament up, they're going to nourish the beach, they had said. And, you talk about beach nourishment, beach cobble is a hell of a lot better than sand. Sand will flow away in a heartbeat. The beach cobble is shaped like it is for thousands of years. We have it on the marsh because that would be free free nourishment, that's all you have to pay is the transportation. And we clean the marsh up. And we're gonna do something with all this permitting. For Christ's sake, it costs more than the jobs cost. And it delays time. The whole state is constipated.
I'm not going to comment on the constipated state. I might agree with you in some ways. But hang on a second, the one thing I do want to point out, the town, one of the things I pointed out, the town is looking at going for a grant, whether it's funded or not, I don't know. But the town is looking at proactively trying to do something as far as nourishment, doing replenishment, and being proactive about that area that is potentially breaching. So the town is looking at doing that. And beyond that, I will say that with the dune nourishment or beach nourishment, you are looking at something that's course grade. You're not looking at something that's safe. Okay?
This lady.
I have two questions. First of all, the cost that you're talking about, is that cost for public beach areas or is that for private beach areas in front of private homes that the public is not able to use?
That's a good question. Right now, my understanding is when the town is redoing seawalls, which were publicly built seawalls, that they are requiring that the homeowners provide public access easements. So that now turns into a public beach for the areas that are being done. And the same thing, if public money is being spent for beach nourishment, public access easements would be required as well.
So Man Hill Beach, for example, is not a public beach in Scituate. So you're talking about spending millions of dollars on beach nourishment and cobble, and who's going to pay for that?
Well,
Are we going to pay for it? Is the town going to pay for it? Because that's all private property. And we don't have, as town people, access to those beaches. There's no parking. We can't go on their beach because they tell us to get off it. But you're saying that it's good to spend $8 million to fix their beach.
Well, the first thing I will say, I'm not necessarily saying it's good to spend it. These are our prioritizations. And the thing is, I will say, and I can't do anything about the parking issue, but one thing I will say is that, that the beaches do become publicly, it no longer is a private beach if there's easements for everything. It's public access in front of all the shoreline where public funds have been spent. But the town has been very proactive, I know along Oceanside, and making sure they're getting public access easements. And the one thing I will say is that for North Scituate, that beach is public now, and if Surfside's done in the future, that beach will become public if that beach is nourished.
Okay.
Okay.
So then they can't take the easement back?
It's a permanent easement. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
This gentleman here.
Question kind of supporting Don. Don usually makes a comment about taking the material that gets on the west side of Central Ave, putting it back on the beach. It's a small replenishment. It does do some benefit in a small storm. It doesn't really do somewhat a major storm. But we haven't been allowed to do that. Is there a scientific reason or a logical reason, or is it all just political?
It's not political. We're dealing with state issues, okay? It's like when water was in.
But state political, or
It's not us. I'd be happy to say dig it up and put it back. The problem is it's coming from the state.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is this, is if when we have storms, whether it be Hummerock or some of the other areas, we're getting overtopping and that material ends up on the wrong side of the beach. And is there an opportunity, or what is the scientific reason, or what is the permitting issues, or what is the opportunity for taking that material and putting it back on the beach? Speaking again, Peggy, Hummerock, etc., the whole thing about the state regulations is that it's meant to allow natural processes to occur, for good or bad. Okay, that just means letting things be natural. If it covers over salt marsh, so be it. That's what was meant to happen. That's the way the regulations are written, and the reason is that the thought is that natural processes are, for lack of a better way of saying it, we've screwed up natural processes for so long that the regulations are written to actually protect those processes because nature heals itself. And it is a really good concept. Does it work in every case? No. Is there opportunities? I would say the opportunity for Hummerock is to try to capture the material before it crosses by adding more material to the beach so that when you do do an overwash, it actually is overwashed into an area that is not on a salt marsh. Because getting into a salt marsh, getting into an area that's a former salt marsh, ends up being, again, you will spend 20 years trying to permit something, and really you're not getting that much material anyways. You're almost better off letting it overwash all the way into the harbor so that you can dredge it. But I guess it's hard to come up with a quick answer for that. But the thing is that what you're supposed to be trying to do, and there are good reasons for it, is to let the beach system act naturally. And so the problem with Hummerock, North Hummerock specifically, and Peggy as well, is they're getting a lot of overtopping and overwash. And maybe erosion is the simplest way of looking at it. But that overtopping is causing adverse impacts. It does cause issues with the salt marsh, but at the same time, that's where the dune wants to be. The dune wants to be behind the houses. It's because the dune wants to be behind the houses, you bring that material forward, you're really just kind of exacerbating problems. The beach is still steep, it's over steep, and now you kind of put a mound up that's steeper, and it's going to be more susceptible to flood damage. So the thing is, if you're going to do it, bringing in lots of material from other places, doing major beach nourishment at Peggy, if that's what the town desires, that would work. Doing major beach nourishment at Hummerock so that you're not getting this overwash into the salt marsh, that would work. But that's the type of thing that you have to do so that the process can work more naturally.
The most important thing is that it did work in Peggy. It did work in Peggy.
Excuse me, ma'am, you had a question. You're not being fair to the rest of the people who've come here and sat for 3 hours. So the next question goes to Scott, please. Either respect the process, ma'am. This is not for you to grandstand.
For 1 more minute? Can I speak for 1 more second?
This is not fair. No, ma'am, you got it. This is the rule. Oh, no, you're not fair. I asked you, please. I asked you to sit down. You had a question. This gentleman's been waiting as long as you, if not longer. I think there are other questions. I asked you. You had 2 questions. And you can. And I said, when we're done with all the questions, everybody can ask a second question. Is that fair? I think it is too. Thank you. This gentleman here.
Yeah, I have a question. The life cycle costs of these, of many of these repairs is enormous. So I'm surprised that there isn't anything in this report that says, there's time to drop back 15 yards, buy the proving grounds, punt, and move the people that are in the major and worst predicaments someplace where they'll be safe and where the town can take care of them. Because it's obvious that we don't have, over the next 50 years, $300 or $400 million to do what you've said, because all the beach nourishment things have a 5 or 10 year life where we have to repeat spending this money. So when do we punt and actually live and look at the reality of life that some of these areas are not sustainable as places where we can live?
It's a fair question. Very good question. And I can go back to my scope and that type of thing, but what it really comes down to is this, is that when we come up with these life cycle costs and we come up with all this information, this is something for the town to digest and make those decisions. This is not a decision for me to make as an engineer. This is a policy level at the town. And they may decide, I'm not going to spend $80 million on trying to keep Oceanside there. We are just not going to make that effort. But I'm giving them the information so that they have the ability to make a reasoned decision, because this is what it's going to cost you to maintain this. And if the town makes a decision not to maintain that, that's up to them.
And let's make sure the town are the people. It's not the Board of Selectmen, it is not Town Hall, it is everybody sitting here, including all the voters, who are going to make that decision.
And, and I think that's why I keep putting the circles up there. It is that, I'm not standing up here speaking that, trying to jam something down the town's throat or the people's throat. What I'm trying to say is this is the evaluation of the best way we can do it based on costs, based on shore protection, and how the town, as the people, want to deal with that. There's some tough decisions to make. I mean, you guys know what kind of town you live in, you know the flood damage that occurs. So this is just, a wake-up call, I guess.
All right. I mean, I'm a consulting engineer, and sometimes I have to give my clients bad news that whatever they want to do doesn't make sense, and I was surprised that there wasn't any, that you haven't presented anything like that in this. Because even moving the houses in Peggotty Beach back 50 feet gives them 10 more years. That's not a very good.
It gives me quite a bit more time than that. If it was 10 years, I wouldn't have looked at it.
Well, I know how much Peggotty Beach has moved in 20 years. And, you know, Man Hill Lot and obviously Hamrock, I don't know what the solution is there, but that's, consultants are responsible for being responsible and to giving people bad news, and I was a little surprised. Thanks.
I guess I would say that not everybody feels like I'm giving good news.
I don't actually have a question, I have a comment. I wanted to thank you for your presentation. It was a lot of information. You identified 14 entire areas of town, each with unique configurations. It brought attention to the needs of each area, and I didn't know the needs of each area, and I really learned a lot. I now know what the priority areas are based on criteria and the costs versus the benefits of doing or not doing something. As a result, you've given the town a master plan to work off of, and I think that's invaluable. It's going to give the town some direction on where to go with limited funds, because obviously we don't have all of the funds to do every project. And I'm very impressed with the town in trying to be so proactive in coastal management. And I hope the people here who have come, who have questions and concerns, can just all see this is a positive step. And because you can't make decisions without information. And that was
Any other question? John, I have to go to the lady, this gentleman here, and then this gentleman, and then I did ask her to say she get the first and second question. Yes, sir.
In one of your slides there, you were showing that there's some, going out to some grants for certain projects. Do you know roughly off the total cost, say it's $150 million to do it all, do you know what percentage would be covered in grants that are available?
Kevin's not yours. I would say right now the grants that the town's looking at are more for design issues right now, so it's a very relatively modest amount. I will say the town's done well at getting grants for doing some stuff on Oceanside, which are construction grants, and that's some significant money in the tens of millions oriented. So there are grants out there. There's a dam and seawall fund that the state runs that the town's had some success with. But again, the amount of money that's available is small compared to what your issues are. I have to be honest.
This gentleman.
Quick question. Have you identified any offshore deposits that would be mineable when I was I'm not familiar with it, but...
There are offshore deposits that are mineable. There are a lot of regulatory fisheries issues right now. There are some sites, I believe, off of Duxbury and off of Hull that do have material that's potentially compatible with some of the beaches here.
Just a comment, I would hope that the town would realize that some of the properties are owned by non-Scituate residents. They own the property, but they're not, it's like you can't even go to and just that, realize that they should be allowed to have a talk on issues too.
Speaking to that, there's a lot of towns on the Cape have non-resident taxpayer associations. I don't know if you guys have one in town, but if that's one of those things to get going, if you think it's an important thing.
You raise an important point, because obviously a lot of decisions in town are made by the voters, and generally those are the ones who are residents year-round. A lot of people aren't year-round. Some live in Florida, some live in other towns. Given the magnitude and the cost and the size and the scope of this long-term, hopefully, solution, I think you raise a point where a consideration needs to be put into play for when we say a town meeting. Traditionally, you can't do a town meeting because you can't vote. You go to the other section. But there could be a process that we could include that so that residents who, such as yourself or other people, have a say in a way. I mean, you do Survey Monkey, you can do online stuff, but I mean, more when we have that kind of like town meeting discussion of what are the votes going to be after option in this section, or whatever we're going to do. But I think that's something that should be considered, and you know what, I'll make sure that the board understands that, what it's like. It's a valid point. Hold on, this lady over here.
I do have a question about elevating the Central Avenue on Rock. My home is on frontage. So my concern is my home going to have to be elevated on piles? Because if that water comes through, a road that should be that, it's going to back up into my house and fill up my road.
I think the one thing to point out is what the town's looking at doing is elevating the road in conjunction with other things, like a dune enhancement and de-nourishment. So you're not going to have the water coming in the way you do now. So you don't have that issue. There certainly is going to be some, you're not necessarily going to have to raise your house. I think that's one of those things that just needs to be looked at on a more site-specific basis, which it has not been right now. I will say that I know that this house has solid foundations there. A lot of them are garages and the basement area type thing that it is living area. But at the same time, I understand that some of that needs to be thought about a little bit more in detail. I don't have that information right now.
Because there's a very big difference with a strip of houses on foundation versus the one that's on the end, the house is on piles next to it. Because the force velocity of water that comes through there. I have videos.
Sure. Well, again, that's the thing. We're trying, the idea is not just to raise the road, it's to do other things too, to maybe minimize a lot of what you're seeing on the videos. Okay?
Any other first questions, anybody?
As far as the public, you talk about those will have tax money as well, paying taxes on that property.
To be honest with you, I'm not quite sure that's
I suspect, normally no, you own the land still, but you have an easement. It's kind of like when you have somebody say, hey, guess what, I want to be able to use your land to be able to gain access to the driveway. There probably would be some diminution in value slightly, but nothing significant to say, I've lost thousands of dollars. And I think when you look up and down the coast, depending if you do beach renourishment and begin to push that structure, if you will, further out in the ocean, then you got a beach there, yes. And in some areas, I know like with Oceanside, there's no beach there, even with low tide. There's nothing there. So I think if you live in an area where yes, there's going to be, sure, there could be a beach area that might have people there. But then again, access is one issue. Parking, somebody raised earlier, is another issue. Really, probably what you're looking at is your neighbors coming down, parking a bench and a cooler right next to your house, if that's the bigger fear. But no, I don't think for easement, you're not going to see a significant issue or diminution in your values of the taxes, because you still own the land. It's just you're allowing people to go, public to go and have access to it.
Keith Jansen, 148 Central Avenue. For full disclosure, I'm also a member of the Coastal Advisory Commission. And like this young lady over here, thank the town very, very much for your interest, involvement, and really leadership to where we need to go in the future. It's so easy to say, yeah, what if this, that, and the other thing, but this is only the beginning. Here's a great recommendation. It's a starting point, but it's up to us as a town, as a community to pull together and say, okay, we understand, John, what you say the priorities are. Now we have to balance that with some reality, funding, and I'm glad you brought up easements because a lot of people are afraid of easements. Oh my gosh, people are going to take over my property. No, that's the furthest thing from the truth. So one of our goals as the Coastal Advisory Commission is to reach out to everybody on the local level. We have monthly meetings. We're going to begin to have them in the local areas in Hammerock, in Egypt Beach, and so on and so forth over the next few months, so we get all the comments for anybody and everybody who wants to talk about it. Then we have to figure out what's the best solution for all of Scituate as a community, and then move the process forward. So this is not going to be done like this. It's a process. And yes, this is unique, and thank you for the opportunity.
I may have missed it, but Fort Cliff, the Air Force Base, the recreational area that's at Fort Cliff, did you touch on anything, any plans for that area?
I did not touch on it. It's a federal facility, and that's something that we were not tasked with looking at. We certainly want to maintain and protect the access to it, through the talking about Central Avenue, but we certainly did not look at the actual, the Air Force has plans right now to redo a revetment out there and provide protection. I don't know what the exact status of that, but it's they're also looking at some nourishment as well. Again, I'm not sure of the status, but they're certainly moving forward with a plan to protect that facility.
Any other first questions? Anybody? Lady in the back.
Okay. I have a comment first to just respond to the comment that you made about Peggy Beach, and then I have a question. Very few people are aware that residents on Peggy Beach that abut the public beach do a whole lot for the beach and care for it immensely. And what happens to us happens to the harbor, happens to all of Scituate. And we have a permit for a dune, and that dune was taken down last year by the selectmen. The state rep, the governor, and all of us asked for that dune to be brought back up to proper height, 18 feet, just like you said. It can go up to 22. It was not done. And the erosion that is taking place on Peggy Beach is catastrophic. It's a public beach. It's used by the most people in town who use Peggy Beach. It's the most beloved beach in town. And yet the town had put the least amount of resources. And by the town, I mean the selectmen. So when you say that the townspeople have the voice, we have no voice on Peggy Beach. We have zero voice. Even the state rep has zero voice. We went on our behalf to the town to help, mediate or try to have a dialogue. But instead, just as you shut me off earlier, the town shuts us off all the time. So my question is, there have been numerous studies done, not just on Peggy Beach, but on the shoreline, just as you have done with us today. And it goes back many, many, many years, 50 plus years. What you have stated here is not very unlike what has been suggested 50 years ago. And yet, it was never implemented then, and it was never implemented now. So how far does it go with your study? You give the study to the town, and then what happens? Does it then go to the town, and the town wants to further implement it or adopt it? Because certainly Peggy Beach study was never adopted, and that was done in 2008.
I guess the concept here, so we did the study. Obviously, the purpose is to be a proactive study to try to get the town the tools that they need to move forward. I'm well aware of the Peggy study that was done. I'm not quite sure, from a standpoint of how the town is going to take this, that's up to the citizens of the town. You guys are the voices for the town. I can't drive this forward. I'm an engineer, not an advocate. So, what I'm trying to do is give you the information. I understand your passion for Peggy, and I applaud you. And to be honest with you, it's great to enhance the dunes. I'm all for it. It's a great idea. What I want to try to bring you back to, so you understand where I'm coming from, is from a shore protection standpoint. It's hard for me to justify spending a lot of money on something that, from a infrastructure protection standpoint, doesn't have that high priority or high dollar value concern. So, but from the standpoint of what you're saying as far as protecting a public resource, etc., I applaud you, and I think raising the dune and all of those things are worthwhile efforts. But from my perspective, I can't justify it.
But they worked, so how could you not justify it?
I can't justify it because that's not, my role is to try to prioritize things based on protecting public infrastructure. And again, it's what are we spending and what are we protecting? And so if I look at that standpoint, it's harder to justify. I'm not saying it doesn't work to some level, but again, it may work on some of these smaller storms, but when you get the 91 northeaster or the 78 storm, it's not going to work. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. Again, there should be again, I think this whole discussion, as was pointed out, what we come up with as recommendations are not necessarily what the town's going to follow. And the reason for that is that there are other considerations in town, not just because people are speaking louder, but there may be very good reasons to do what you're suggesting that are outside of the purview of what I'm evaluating, if that makes sense.
It does, but I think that if it does come to the townspeople to vote, then we should have the ability to vote on whether or not we implement a plan and not just have the selectmen decide whether a plan should be implemented. Hence why none of these plans from previous years have ever been implemented, because they were never really
John,
done.
you're next. Go ahead.
John, just want to
See you later.
and we're working on the dredging in the South River.
Yep.
So disrespectful.
What we need is support of the town hall. We want near shore dumping. 48 years ago when we dredged before, the first part of the dredging, they insisted we take it down to the state dumping grounds, which is crazy. That's a day down there and a day back because of foolish regulations. We pushed, and then when we did the second part of the dredging, the most of the river, we dumped it near shore, which is just offshore. It's public waters, so there's no permitting, no easements or anything like that. And as long as it stays in the water column, it helps take the energy out of the ocean, kind of the way that,
Otherwise, I will.
The one thing I will say, from a coastal engineering standpoint, I am not a fan of nearshore placement. And the reason why is it really does not do what you think it does. It's very difficult, I'm aware of the project that was done, it's very difficult for them to place it in a water depth that allows it to move on shore. And it does not really do much as far as breaking wave energy. So my recommendation for everybody, and it's not just for the town of Scituate, is if you're dredging material and you can get it on a beach, get it on a beach. That was it.
Have to do it hydraulically and you have too much rocks there.
They can do it mechanically. I mean, it can be done. There are different ways of getting it done, but it can be done.
And John, to your point, I wish Kevin was here because they're actually doing the dredging now, another section of it. I believe it's like 30,000 cubic yards. And I know some of it is actually going down to Wrexham, if I'm not mistaken. Or is it? No. I know that we're going to be putting some on Hummerock.
It's all slated for a central out, unless, of course, we can't get the easements, and then it's Fourth Cliff.
Okay, so the 30,000 cubic yards that they're pulling out of the South River is going to be for Central Ave and then also for the beach around Fourth Cliff.
That's right.
All right. Well, that's news to me.
It'll stay in
There's a question that I was thinking, could we pipe it and get it over to the mainland too? But bottom line is, sand that's being dredged in the South River on Scituate property is going to be used for Scituate property because in the past it's been used for marsh filling. And my feeling has always been, if you're dredging Scituate property, the sands, especially for, at least for beaches, should stay and remain in Scituate.
So with the back down to the field, it was about 50 feet of water. Now I was shocked because when the tide went out, you could see the waves were starting to break on it, and then it dispersed. As long as it stays in that water column, it's working, it's helping.
Thank you. This lady over here.
I just want to thank everyone for all the hard work they've done, the time that it's taken, the research, to put this together, phase 1 and phase 2. It was very well done, it was very much appreciated, and I'm personally looking forward to the next step of the decisions that are being made. Because, it's really easy to sit here and, sit there and criticize and stuff, but the bottom line is, you have the entire town that we're trying to make the right decisions for.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a follow-up comment to you, Don, actually, about the dredging and putting the sand back in Humrock. There's an initiative underway, and I've met with Nancy a week or so ago about trying to bring the northern section of Central Avenue, Humrockians, sort of together to understand, okay, then make sure that that dredging material goes back on the beach in Humrock. What does it take? And frankly, the short answer is easement privileges. And so there's going to be an education process, and you're going to hear more from me and others. And I'll bring up a quart of strawberries for you this weekend, and we'll sit down and talk about it.
Other questions? Yes.
I have a question about second and third cliff revetments and Peggy Beach. Those revetments are man-made, so I'm wondering why everyone refers to the movement of the sand as being natural. Because in my way of thinking, if you have man-made revetments, it's going to take a man-made solution to help mitigate the damage that is going on, especially in the Great Salt Marsh and the creek. There's the Wetland Protection Act that is, under the laws of the Commonwealth, has to be protected. So when you say that's a violation, if you don't do everything you possibly can to protect the wetlands, if all the solution is retreat, move the houses back, it sounds counterintuitive to me. I think the man-made solution is to armor the beach with nourishment. So I was just wondering.
Well, the legal side of it, it's hard for me to address. I mean, I'm not a legal person. I will say this is a pretty common problem around Massachusetts where there's a revetment and you're down here at the Venice Beach and that beach has been impacted by that revetment. A lot of case law, a lot of lawsuits, no doubt. In the long term, it's really hard because you basically have to prove, shadow of a doubt. The reason why, for instance, Peggy Beach is eroding is because those revetments were put in place. So we're going to prevent something that new. It's a hard thing to prove because the beach is probably eroding anyways. It may have been eroding slower. So it is tough. But from the Wetlands Protection Act standpoint, again, at least dealing with regulators, the way I've dealt with them over the years, they've never looked at, it's like what exists today is the natural condition. It's not necessarily thinking about the way you're looking at it. Historically, everything's been armored, so therefore you've altered the natural conditions, so therefore we should look at what it would have looked like if nobody had put in these structures. That's not the way it's managed, I guess is the best way of saying it. The way it's looked at now is the way that Peggy Beach and the structures are around it is the way that they look at as the existing, how we call natural, the existing condition that they want to deal with from a regulatory standpoint. And I'm not answering. I understand what your issue is. I'm just sort of telling you what the reality is, the way that it's dealt with.
Okay, I know it's complex, and I appreciate, the thought process that you put into it, but it is, in my opinion, counterintuitive.
It is in a way. And again, the one thing I would like to say is I'm not against nourishing. No, I'm just saying from a cost-benefit standpoint, it's hard to justify. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing.
If we had more houses on Peggy Beach, would that be a different story?
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's where we're coming from.
If you had a sewer line with Peggy Beach, it would be a different situation.
Exactly.
So then you have to look at the way we prioritize things, and that's, if that's the issue, then that's where the discussion would have to be.
And that's the thing, that's where the emotions come in, and I'm not being disrespectful here, but I really think the town as a whole has to consider how precious that beach is, how many people use it. And yes, there aren't a lot of us that live on it, but it needs to be addressed. And to be in a high priority box and to be put there as retreat, I just don't think that's fair at all. And again, emotions are playing into it. There's a lot of science, there's legal aspects of it, and ethically and morally, it's counterintuitive to what's being suggested. That's all I want to say. But thank you. Thank you for listening.
Anybody? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you, John. Thank you, Rebecca. Rebecca also. Nancy Durfee, thank you very much. Folks, the report will be probably coming out late mid-summer, I think. And this is just a one step forward. We'll be getting back together and having more meetings and look forward for your involvement. Thank you.